Excellent. And just want to thank everybody for joining us this morning for the opening workshop number 1 for the RDF proceeding, or the rulemaking 20-07-013. This will be phase 3, and we've got quite a bit of workshops to go through in the next few months, but the first is going to discuss an evaluation of post-test years and uncertainty and transparency pilot. But while we're waiting for folks to trickle in, I'm going to swing us through a quick safety culture message about metallic balloons. Sometimes these are also part of the idea of foil or mylar balloons. They actually caused 520 outages and 18 ignitions in the last 5 years that I learned from SDG&E's website. And I'm assuming that's probably just in their territory, but I'm sure they've caused outages in other territories as well. And last year, AB 847 was passed to phase out foil balloons. Unless they can pass an IEEE standard, it's 2845. And I'm going to share that in the chat with you all, just in case you're interested in this technical stuff. And this isn't going to undergo a 3-year trial. So starting next year in 2024. For those who don't know, SPD's very own Wendy L. Mukdad is doing some outstanding work on this. So you're welcome to contact her if you have any questions about it. She also wanted me to share this article from the San Diego Union Tribune that talks about metallic balloons. And I just wanted to share a personal story about what to do and what not to do when you see a metallic balloon like this tangled around some wires.
Connect the room to a WebEx.
Hey, sorry there. If you could mute, thanks. So we've got, so anyway, one day I was at my house, and I saw these metallic balloons tangled around the cable wire there. And I knew from talking to Wendy, the best thing you can do is to call your local utility. So I looked it up online and found this number here for SCE, because I'm based in Los Angeles, and called them, and they told me that it was probably going to be about 45 minutes. It was actually easier for them to get to these balloons through my neighbor's yard, but I did not know him, and I did not have his phone number. So I told SCE if they wanted to, they could come in through my backyard to come take down the balloons. Went to go cook dinner, and after I came back, set dinner down on the table, I look out the window, and here are 3 balloons slowly floating away. And I ran outside to look, and there is my neighbor on a ladder, and he's taken a box cutter and duct taped it to a piece of wood, and he's standing on the ladder, and he's hacking at the strings that are attached to the mylar balloons. And I said, stop. SCE will be here soon. You can stop doing that. But by that time, it was too late. The last balloon had already sailed. And so that's an example of what not to do. And so I just wanted to share this with everybody, that these are the numbers for you to call if you see metallic balloons that are in a dangerous situation. So please share this with, and there's Wendy, with folks who aren't aware of this. And I believe the utilities also share these numbers in some printouts and stuff that they send around to their customers. All right. So that's our safety culture message for today. And I just wanted to first let everybody know that this meeting is going to be recorded. It already is being recorded. And there's going to be 1 or more decision makers who may be present during the meeting, but no decisions will be taken. And I believe that Commissioner Reynolds is joining us, if he's here already. Yep, he is. Commissioner Reynolds, if you want to do a mic check real quick.
Hear me okay?
Yep, that sounds good. We'll come back to you in just a second. Commissioner Reynolds is going to give us some opening words. But first, I just wanted to do a quick roll call for our parties and interveners who are joining us. Is SCE on the line?
Yes.
Great. And PG&E?
Eddie, yes, we're on the line.
Excellent. Those are both SCE and PG&E are going to be giving us presentations today, along with folks from SPD, which I'll get to in the agenda in a second. Is Public Advocate's Office on the line?
Yes, Anna Yang is here.
Great. And Sempra Companies. Anybody from Sempra?
Yeah, Sempra is here.
Great. And the Utility Reform Network. Anybody from Turn? Oh yeah, Katie.
Katie Morsoni's here, and we also have a new consultant, Eric Borden, on the line.
Eric, great. Okay. And Mussy Grade Road Alliance, MGRA. Is Dr. Mitchell here? Is that Dr. Mitchell on the phone? No, he might be at a different meeting this morning. Okay, anyone from Protect Our Communities Foundation? No? Anybody from Energy Producers and Users Coalition and Indicated Shippers? No?
Kendrin for indicated shippers.
Indicated Shippers, okay, great. Anybody for Energy Producers and Users Coalition?
Same, thank you.
Oh, okay, great, yeah. And Utility Consumers Action Network. No? Oh. Okay. Have I missed any other groups that I might have missed? Okay, great. So this agenda is going to be relatively fixed that you can see here on the screen because we want to accommodate the presenters and the stakeholders' schedules. So if we do run a little bit ahead of schedule, we probably will need to create a consensus about whether or not we can push ahead. Otherwise, we'll probably end up taking like a long lunch. If that happens today, we will need to take a long lunch or we'll end up wrapping up early this afternoon. So we can come to that bridge if we have to later this morning. And then I just want to go over a couple of just attendee participation issues. I'm going to resend our IT support email. If you have any issues, you can contact Marcos Rodriguez. And you all have the ability to mute and unmute yourselves. But we would ask that you stay muted except during the Q&A period, and that during the presentation of each session, we would ask that all the attendees enter your questions into the chat box, and then please address all of the questions to the everyone selection so that we all get to see them. And then those of us at SPD, we're going to do our best to occasionally interrupt the presenter if there's a clarifying question. But for non-clarifying questions, we're going to hold those until the discussion period. And Fred and I are going to be kind of paying attention to the chat box about that. If there's not enough time to respond to all the chat box questions, SPD will collect all the answers to those questions, and then we're going to circulate them to the service list after the workshop. During the discussion, you can also use the raise hand function to speak, and the moderator will do their best, that's me, to call on you in the order that I see them. And then after the question is asked, please remember to lower your hand, but I can also do that for you if need be. For those on the phone, if you could also stay on mute until the Q&A begins, that would be great. And we'll try to get to your questions. If you just want to take yourself off mute, we'll let you speak as quickly as possible. And with that, I believe we can give it over to Commissioner Reynolds, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit more about the agenda.
Thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. I'm John Reynolds, and I'm the assigned commissioner in the risk-based decision-making proceeding. Today, we'll be discussing post-test year rate making and the transparency pilot. In my mind, both of these topics get at a really important issue. How can we get high-quality information into the general rate cases that is relevant, transparent, and actionable, both for the parties and for the commission? My tremendous thanks to the staff and Safety Policy Division for organizing this workshop. Thanks to the parties for their participation today. This is a challenging and technical topic. We rely on your feedback to build the record in this proceeding. I will be here for the morning session, and I may miss the afternoon session. My Chief of Staff, Suzanne Casaba, is present for today's work as well as my advisor, Jake Dermott. Those of you who have not met, they will be attendance and listening, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner. Let's go back to the agenda real quick. Right. So yeah, we're going to work through post-year discussion this morning, and then we'll be working on the transparency pilot in the afternoon. We'll take a slight break at 11 and then lunch at 12, and we'll have another break in between in the afternoon, a little bit longer, about 15 minutes for that break. And then we'll try to wrap things up by about 4 o'clock this afternoon, if not sooner. So just a quick review of the phase 3 timeline. We have quite a few topics and challenging topics that we're going to be discussing over the next few months. Next, we're going to have tail risk and consequence modeling on July 26th, and then we'll have climate change in September. Risk scaling will be discussed in October, and then we'll have another long session that'll discuss 2 topics, discount rates and ramp reporting templates, in late October. We may have an optional workshop that we're kind of holding for right now for December 6th. And then we're looking forward to having a proposed decision developed sometime in the spring of 2024, and aiming for a final decision sometime around May of 2024. And of course, it would be great if we can stick to this timeline. My wife in particular would be happy because I'm not going to shave until the decision is out. And she would appreciate it if we stick to that timeline. But it's okay if we don't. And just to let you know that before each of these meetings, we're going to stick to a pattern where I'm going to be sharing a set of planning questions a few weeks ahead of time, about 3 weeks ahead of time before the workshop. We're then going to be sharing a set of a proposal or a staff proposal or a party proposal that will help stimulate the conversation for these workshops. You'll get agendas and PPTs usually about 4 days and ahead of time. Please let me know if you have additional questions for the presenters, at least before the agenda and the PPTs go out. I think that sometimes, after reading through a proposal, parties may have some additional questions and they want the presenters to address. Please let us know that ahead of time. It can sometimes help the presenters to structure some of their discussion points as well. And then after workshops, we're going to be filing the staff proposals or the party proposals on the record. And then we'll have comments and replies that'll shape up about 20 days after that. So there's going to be a very large and very detailed record that's going to be developed in this phase 3 timeline. And we're looking forward to a robust discussion over the next few months. For this specific workshop, I'm just going to go over real quick what we're kind of looking forward to. Hafizer Chaudhry is going to give us a quick discussion, or not a quick, but a thorough discussion about post-test year and whether or not the merits, I guess, of presenting cost-benefit ratios for each GRC post-test year, both in the ramp and in the GRC. Because at the moment, our current risk-based decision-making framework does not require utilities to provide post-test year calculations in the ramp or the GRC, well, in the ramp. So we're going to review, why is it that this is important, in order for decision makers to determine the true risk reduction benefits from mitigations. Then in the afternoon, we're going to have multiple discussions about transparency pilot. So PG&E is going to discuss with us the structure of the pilot proposal that they developed in 2021 in D21-1109. And then SCE is going to review the test drive that they developed for their 2022 ramp application. They actually submitted that back to this service list on June 14th, I believe, or maybe June 13th, might have been a day early. I appreciate that. And then we're going to have Steve Hain is going to help us consider some of the additional refinements to the PG&E pilot proposal after he did an evaluation of SCE's test drive. And ultimately, yeah, we're looking for feedback on both the post-test year calculations and also on the transparency pilot. So yeah, we're looking forward to hearing from those of you that are on the line. And let's see, I believe I'm going to turn it over now to Hafizer. Yes. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you, Eddie, for the introduction. Good morning, Commissioner Reynolds, assigned administrative law judges, stakeholders, and the CPUC staff. Once again, my name is Hafizer Chaudhary. The intent of this staff proposal is for the post-test years evaluation in the risk assessment mitigation phase, or simply RAM, and the general rate case, or GRC, where investor-owned utilities, or IOUs, should provide better transparency for decision makers and stakeholders in understanding how much the IOUs intend to spend to reduce the risk for their mitigation programs and provide cost effectiveness for the proposed mitigations without losing the true safety reduction benefits from one post year to the next. Next slide, please. This slide shows how the IOUs really analyze their post-test years. In the 2023 GRC filing, PG&E calculated risk reduction for each of the post-test years and provided risk reduction and cost for the entire rate case period. In the 2021 RAM filing, SUMPRA provided a single RSC for the sum of the three post-test years. Basically, SUMPRA provided aggregate RSCs for post-test years. The reason is that SUMPRA does not make program or project forecasts for the post-test years, but rather they escalate costs from the test year to anticipate the future funding requirements. In the 2022 RAM filing, SCE provided RSC information by tranche for each post-test year in the GRC cycle. To calculate this risk reduction for each post-test year, both PG&E and SCE annually reset the baseline for evaluation of residual risk to be the start of each respective post-test year, which SUMPRA has yet to do in their post-test year analysis. Next slide, please. So staff proposes two central themes around those two items, as you can see on the slide. The first one is the risk-based decision-making framework, or RDF, will require IOUs to submit cost-benefit ratios, or CBRs simply, in each of the GRC post-test years for every control and mitigation program, consistent with existing requirements, as Eddie mentioned earlier. It is helpful to understand the post-test years cost-benefit ratio in each of the GRC post-test years by tranche for long-term capital-intensive mitigation proposals that are expected to reduce long-term risk. Cost-benefit ratio will help the decision makers to determine if continuing investment in reducing type mitigation at the proposed amounts will continue to produce cost-effective risk mitigation for post-test years. The second one is the post-test year analysis will assume that the utility will buy down the highest risk tranche first, so that the remaining residual risk in the following years is lower, and also that the available risk reduction per work unit in the remaining tranche is lower. The problem is that if mitigation work is assumed to have equal cost effectiveness regardless of the tranche, the matrix that reports on future years would make it appear that the mitigations are more effective because the total remaining risk is smaller. So an equal amount of work would produce a greater percentage of risk reduction. To support the calculations, the Commission should authorize the IOUs to make assumptions of the future effectiveness of the risk mitigations as long as they are clearly stated. Next slide, please. So staff recommend the Commission modify the RDF to require the IOUs to undertake the following. Provide more detailed analysis of their proposed mitigations in the RAMP and GRC filings for each of the GRC post-test years under consideration. Submit cost-benefit ratios for each of the GRC post-test years by tranche for reducing type mitigation that are expected to permanently reduce residual risk. For example, overhead bare conductors to underground insulated conductors. Improve their risk mitigation proposal in their RAMP and GRC filings for post-test years by considering and providing reasonable assumptions, historical data, methodology, baseline, and other relevant analysis. Prioritize the highest risk elements from their entire assets. Consider appropriately granular tranches, then prioritize which segment of these tranches would maximize risk reduction and effectiveness of mitigation from one post-test year to the next with the remaining residual risk. Next slide, please.
This meeting is being recorded.
So finally, this slide basically shows the suggested language to the RDF, which is also included in Appendix A of the staff proposal for post-test year cost efficiency matrix for Phase 3 ASME proceeding. And this concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, so we are way ahead of schedule. I just wanted to point out that Ken Arnold had made a clarification that PG&E actually provided tranche level RSEs for their post-test years, and that was similar to what SCE did.
Yes.
And that I'm assuming that's in there. Is that true for the ramp, Ken? Is that what you were referring to?
It is. I just wanted to clarify, and Sarah, I think in your first slide, I just wanted to note that there was similarity between what PG and SCE did. It was just worded a little bit differently. So I just wanted to be clear.
Sure. Yep.
Sure. Thank you so much for clarification.
Although we are ahead of schedule, and I just said that we might need consensus to adjust the schedule. I wanted to see if we should go ahead and open up the discussion at least, and before the break, and we could always come back after the break and continue discussion. Does anyone have any disagreements with that? Yeah, Katie? No? Great. Yeah, so if anybody has any opening remarks or questions that they'd like to send our way, please do. Use a raise hand feature, or you can send a question in the chat. All right, I see Matthew Smith. Please go ahead and unmute yourself from EPUC. Hi, Matthew. Can you hear us okay? Let's see if... whoop. Huh. Hi, Matthew. Can you unmute? There we go.
Oh, are you able to hear me now?
Yeah, it's a little bit staticky, but give it a shot.
Okay. So I was curious with the tranches, with the asset upgrades that are needed, are we considering the risk of expectation of failure, or like for the actual equipment in service, or are we referring to historical amounts of actual failure? Because I think that's kind of what's referred to. Is there anywhere in the model where it would show it's being accounted for, like for instance, how long somebody's been in service and how that will affect the increased risk to failure? Or is it just based off of the historic amount of equipment that needs to be replaced?
I think Brad is ready to respond on that.
I would just say, in general, we have the risk decision framework, defines risk in terms of likelihood and consequence. And I believe the utilities frequently make use of historical trends to predict what the likelihood of failure is in their risk calculation. So this doesn't change any of that. Any of the utilities are welcome to respond on how they approach making use of data to make their likelihood of failure calculation.
Okay. Did that help answer your question, Matthew?
I think so. If I could just follow up a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
The likelihood of failure calculations, have those been provided to us at this point in work papers? And if so, could you point me in that direction?
Ken, did you want to respond directly to that?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, I'm curious about the likelihood of failure calculations, if that's something that's been provided to parties in work papers at this point, and if so, could I be pointed in that direction?
Yeah, PG&E does provide those kind of calculations. We turn that likelihood of failure into a frequency, and it's in our work papers. I think we should probably take that offline as to where in our work papers for PG&E you can find those numbers.
Sure.
And Katie, did you have something to add on to that?
No, I had a separate topic or comment. Okay. So if the utilities want to continue to respond first, that's fine.
Okay. Anybody from SCE or Sempra that wanted to respond to Matthew's question?
This is Dan from SCE. Same as Ken and Vincent mentioned. Yes, we provide those in work papers, and they are quite numerous and voluminous depending on where. So, if happy to have that conversation offline as well.
I appreciate it.
Okay, great. Matt, did you have any other questions, or is that all?
I think that's it for me at the moment.
All right, great. Katie, why don't you go ahead and shoot your question up?
Yeah, this may be in one of those best categorized as a comment-esque question, but I just wanted to send out an appreciation for the focus and the highlighting of the issue of granularity of the tranches in the presentation, because I think that is very key to, as Commissioner Reynolds put it this morning, having high quality information in the GRC and information that is relevant and actionable. If that information isn't provided on a granular basis, we're less able to see sort of the variation in the cost benefit ratio over different types of locations and in different types of areas with different levels of potential risk. And so I really wanted to highlight that and sort of, I guess, maybe ask the commission if along the along with these recommendations regarding post-test year, is there any openness to sort of further drilling down on what is required for granularity of the tranches, so that we're sure that we're getting the information that is relevant and actionable in the GRCs.
So I just wanted to jump in on that particular question because from our planning questions that we developed for this workshop, we actually asked specifically, should the IOUs be required to divide the risk tranches for capital intensive mitigation proposals to a sufficiently granular level in order for the reporting of cost benefit ratios in each of the GRC post-test years to be useful? If so, how should sufficiently granular be defined? We're also asking that parties, when parties file comment and replies on this particular workshop on our proposal, that they structure the replies according to the planning questions. We're going to issue a ruling on that after the workshop. Okay, I see lots of hands going up now.
Well, I just want to say thank you for that, and we look forward to responding further on that. In our view, the original settlement agreement, which has now been adopted as a risk RDF, I guess, by the commission, is pretty clear on tranches, but I think maybe readdressing the language to make sure our understanding is everyone's understanding will be fruitful. So thank you.
We agree. Yeah. And I can come back to this set of questions a little bit later if we have some additional time, but I wanted to first address, I know Ken, you guys had your hand up, and you'd also asked if we could move to the slide of the proposal. I just wanted to make sure this was the slide that you were referring to. Is that right?
It was not the slide, it was the slide beforehand, but maybe some the slide after, but maybe some clarifications here. I mean, it seems like this is the what you're proposing to go into the new RDF appendix.
Yes, that's correct.
Appendix A, perhaps.
Yes.
So a couple questions. Curious, there's already an existing number 26, I believe.
Yes, that's right. It would be shifted down. The rest of them would shift down.
So that the numbering is not reflective of you're not going to take out number 26 and replace it with
No. We're just going to make this 26 because it logically makes sense in that particular position. Everything else will shift down.
Oh, I see. Okay. Okay, and then just a clarification, when you say GRC post-test year, you also mean that, you really mean, do you mean for both the GRC and ramp filings? Or?
Well, for the RDF, this has, it's effective for the ramp, and therefore it will also have influence within the GRC as well. So this is definitely for the ramp and the GRC.
Okay. So kind of moving to the previous slide, some questions we have on the previous slide.
Sure.
So these I understand are recommendations. As far as the point number 3 about the granularity, we're also kind of the opinion that the RDF kind of has the guidance for the tranches, right? The homogeneous risk profile, and that's what we've been working with. Our thought on it is that whether the risk profile is homogeneous or not, and the appropriate amount of granularity is probably going to be quite risk specific, and might take a few tries to get there, right? You don't really know what you have until you look at it, and then you kind of refine it, which is kind of the process we adopted. So just curious to see like what you were thinking in terms of improvements. If we have a process out there, it could go smoother, but I think like for we strive to use that process to get the level of granularity that everyone wants to see. So and then I a question on the recommendation number 1, just wondering what you mean by provide detailed analysis of the proposed mitigations in the ramp and GRC. Is it something beyond what PG&E has provided? We do provide the post-test year RSE by tranche is there, and the work paper supporting how those numbers were developed. So just curious, is there other things that you are looking for, and if you could provide more detail around recommendation.
Great. I'm going to let Hafizer and Fred kind of talk about your second question, and then maybe we can circle back to the other question about granular tranches.
Okay, yeah, I'll jump in. PG&E does provide considerable detail in their work papers currently. I think what we would only want is maybe a little more narrative behind, you know, what assumptions were made about risk reduction expected to be achieved in each of those post-test years. Was the assumption that the highest risk tranches are planned to be mitigated first, or is the assumption that sort of a constant level of risk reduction is expected to be achieved? You know, having some narrative behind the presentation of the numbers, I think would be very helpful. So that would be my recommendation for how to respond to that. The analysis of the proposed mitigations would include that kind of discussion.
Thank you, Fred.
So regarding the granular tranches, I think I'm just going to emphasize again that at the moment, what we're trying to do is find out as much information from parties as we can about what granularity actually means and what it should mean. I think you're right, Ken, that, or sorry, that was Vincent, my bad. Vincent, that at the moment, the RDF has been flexible and has allowed the utilities to go risk by risk and determine what the appropriate tranching level is. And that's pretty much how we have evaluated it in our ramp evaluations as well. But we're looking for feedback from different parties about how to address that going forward. And Eric, I know you've had your hand up for quite some time, so if you wanted to.
Well, no, I took it down and now I put it back up.
Okay.
Yeah, on the tranche granularity, I mean, it is a really good point. It seems like a different topic, but it's really not, as I think we're recognizing, because if tranches aren't granular, then all the post-test year RSCs are going to be the same because you just have a big bucket of risk. And
exactly what our concern is.
Yeah, and I think the problem that we've had is there is a definition of what is granular, which is having homogeneous risk over the area or type of assets or whatever. And I think, you know, I want to say that's a language in the settlement. Katie can correct me. But the problem is the utilities, you know, even when they have more granular models kind of underlying their RSC calculations, so they know that, for example, tier 3 in wildfire risk isn't homogeneous, right? It's highly heterogeneous. It's risk varies a lot across tier 3. They still will aggregate, you know, all the risks. Well, not all of them. Okay, let's say at least one of them will aggregate all the risks across that, you know, that whole area. And so even though we have this, you know, on the other hand, I can understand the point that you don't want like 10,000 tranches because, you know, and I do think that's a fair point. So it is, I think we do have a definition of what granular means. And now that said, I think the IUs are somewhat right in that it is like when you look at how they've done it, that's when you see like, oh man, this is way too aggregate. For example, the example I gave. And so I think, you know, we can put out that definition, but I think the issue that we've had is everybody has, let's just say, defined it differently. Now that said, for a lot of these areas, the utilities like within gas, within wildfire, they have these really granular underlying models. And so my hope would be that more of that gets moved into the RSC calculations because there is such a better understanding across all the utilities for different areas. And I believe that applies to both gas, gas risk modeling as well as wildfire risk modeling.
I just wanted to emphasize cost benefit ratios instead of RSEs going forward. Sorry about that. But
yep, thank you.
That's great. I really appreciate that, Eric. I also see that Matt Smith has entered in a question into the chat. I was wondering, Matt, if you wanted to read that out and maybe just if you had a moment to explain what you're asking for here.
Sure. I was just asking how the risk matrix and tranching can separate or if they really is what I'm wondering, if they separate cost-benefit risk assessment for expected asset failures versus degradation in service, reliability, and quality. But what I'm wondering is for the risk assessments that are going on, are those two issues equally weighted or are they separately weighted? We have, is an asset that has a risk of failure, especially if it has a risk of failure, immediately, is going to be weighted the same in the risk assessment as an asset that may just be degrading.
Do any of the utilities want to jump in on answering that question? Anyone from PG&E or SE or Sempra? No? Maybe, is there just a clarifying issue here? Because generally within the RDF, we're looking at, if we're parsing it out, we're generally parsing out across safety, reliability, and financial risk. And so is the question, Matt, that you're trying to get at is, are they differentiating across differences in safety and reliability with regard to asset failure? Because if that's the question, then yes, I believe they have to.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the idea. I'm just wondering if there's a differentiation in the risk assessment between an asset that is losing quality of service. For instance, like a solar panel, they will produce less and less versus something that's going to fail. Or is that considered the same risk? Because both parts need to be replaced, but obviously the one that's going to fail or has especially if it has a public safety hazard, would presumably be weighted higher on the risk category.
So with, sorry, did somebody want to jump in on that? One thing that I would just mention is that after the last decision that was passed in December, there's no longer a separate weighting that's placed upon the safety attribute, which was the case within the MAVF framework. The cost-benefit ratios that we're using now don't generally lend themselves to that. But I don't know if Vincent or anybody at Dan at SCE or anybody at Sempra, we haven't heard from yet. If you guys have anything to add to that.
Maybe you can ask a clarifying question.
Sure.
You spoke about solar panels and you kind of presented two different kind of things going on. One is the panel is just producing less and the other is a risk, right? So is the question really in your risk assessment, what is considered a risk?
Yeah.
Is that the question?
I mean, it might be as simple as, the answer might be as simple as the risk output for the two scenarios is different. Obviously, one being that it's a risk of failure, and one being it's a risk of a reliability issue or just a degradation. I'm just was curious if there is that type of granularity in the risk stuff. Or if you have an asset that is at risk of failing and you have another asset which is at risk of degrading, would the risk for both of those be weighted the same, or is there something that is separating the difference between the levels of risk?
Yeah, maybe I'll have to answer that in a more kind of general manner. I don't think we have, to start with, I don't think we have any solar panel kind of risk right now in our report GRC. So I'm going to try to extend it to a different kind of more general thing. I would say that, that we model, once again, the risk framework is kind of likelihood times consequence, right? So I would think that, speaking a little bit more generally, the different modes of failure, different kinds of sub-drivers, perhaps, different kind of drivers of failures, that could have different kinds of outcomes in our risk, in our implementation of it, right? Different kind of outcomes. One is, you have a sudden failure, at least a certain kind of outcome, and then you might have a, more gradual kind of failure, has different kind of outcomes. So there is the provision to do that kind of modeling. It would have to depend on the specific assets that we're thinking about. Hope that answers the question.
I would just say something like, we model loss of service as a reliability attribute, and we adopted a particular way of monetizing.
I'm sorry, excuse me. I'm sorry, this is Matthew again. After I asked my question, I tried to hit the mute button and I accidentally hit the speaker and hung myself up. I'm sorry about that. Got back.
Okay.
Eddie, I was just going to ramble a little bit on just reminding folks that in our current RDF model, we just decided to quantify electric reliability using the model produced over at the Lawrence or the Livermore. Livermore lab created the ICE interrupt cost estimator, right? It's probably not an ideally perfect way of handling every loss of service, but we needed to have something in there. So we're currently using that as a way of assigning a dollar value to loss of service. And that way, when you look at your likelihood in natural units and your consequences, most likely consequences would be customer minutes interrupted or similar kind of measurement, then that gets turned into a dollar value. And that gives you the value, the current value of the risk, how high is the risk in dollars. But that would have been created by considering, right, the likelihood that something was going to fail and the consequences of what happens when that failure occurs.
And just to add on to that, is that the current RDF does not have a weighting that would distinguish between degradation or a failure. And I think what Vincent, you may have not heard what Vincent was saying there, Matthew, but I think he was saying that at the moment that's also not how they generally approach this particular issue.
Well, I was saying basically that, we look at drivers, and there's sub-drivers, right? That's how we characterize that. And different kinds of failure modes might be different drivers, and they might lead to different outcomes. So there's the ability, depending on the risk, to do that. In our implementation, there's the ability to do that kind of analysis. So it all depends on the risk.
Yeah. Okay, Matt, does that help answer your question?
It does, thank you.
Okay, great. Is there any other additional questions to address? Did we want to circle back to the tranching discussion? Did anybody have any follow-ups on that?
I'll just add in that, we thought at a bare minimum, if we are expecting to see a difference in the post-test years, you would need at least to have enough tranches so there could be one tranche per post-test year. And that would be, that probably wouldn't be sufficient granularity, but it would be kind of a guide to where people should start thinking about it, right? So how are you going to differentiate what your mitigations are achieving if you can't group your asset into chunks of highest risk, next highest risk, not quite as high risk, or, you know, you could end up with scenarios where all of your tranches that you're expecting to work on in the next 4 years have extremely similar levels of risk reduction available, and then you would show that we have fairly consistent, you know, constant. It's such a large pool of risk, and even though you've broken it down into different risk levels, there's still very compelling reasons, you know, from a cost-benefit ratio to continue to. So you would want to do that analysis. You want to see what that looks like. You want to have enough data differentiation, granularity to look at that. I just would point out that, I mean, there's a real difficulty in the definition of the RDF about tranches being homogeneous areas. I think there's probably I think PG&E has demonstrated there's kind of a practicality where you start grouping things by similar. You don't want, as we've said, 10,000 or more tranches because nobody can really rationally analyze that number. So in the current like PG&E GRC, they've come up with 25 tranches for wildfire distribution risk. I think people are finding that a helpful, useful number to work with, even though clearly you could break it down far more granularly. But at some point, there's a practicality that comes in. That's my thought. And I see Katie raised her hand.
Yeah. I just wanted to kind of follow up on that thought. Because I do think that there is a lot of room between, you know, I'm going to say, I think even 25 tranches and 10,000 tranches. And it is with greater granularity that we're able to better scope and, you know, pace our mitigations. And I was just going to suggest / challenge myself and others to perhaps propose language that they think better moves us to that end in comments for like line 14 of the settlement, so that we can maybe perhaps all yeah, I'm just gonna stop there.
Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
Well, I'll add another complication to this, which is the utilities sometimes or often, sorry for my kid in the background, sometimes or often will say, well, we don't know where we're going to do these mitigations, and they handle that differently. So like PG&E, well, so yeah, how PG&E, for example, scopes or kind of allocated among its 25 tranches where each thing was going to go, and that's for wildfire, was different than how other utilities do it. So I'm just flagging that as well. And yeah, Katie and I will take on a challenge of trying to think of additional language to like homogeneous, you know, how to make sure that this is useful. But, you know, even the 25 tranches example, many of those tranches were like over 1,000 miles, right? And so let's just say that you had scoped even a fairly large program, you still might be in within just one tranche, even in that example. So yeah, it gets complicated, but I do think, as Katie said, there's some, even between 25 and the 10,000, there's a lot of room. And you know, another thing I'm thinking about is, can you use, even if you had 10,000 tranches, right? you could aggregate those in a way for the filing where, okay, we have, you know, the very granular model underlying it. We have risk calculations that we use, but then we aggregate those for the filing. Like for me as sort of the analyst one, I want the work paper with the really granular stuff, and then I'll decide how to aggregate that, and the utilities can decide their way too, and for the filing itself. So, you know, the preference would be having kind of both of those, but I understand certainly practical limitations of doing all that.
And I just wanted to emphasize that, I see Wendy popped up. So actually, I think she's going to say what I was going to say. So I'm going to let her jump in here. Go ahead, Wendy.
I'm not sure if I'm going to say what you're going to say. And I'm concerned that you're going to have a beard that's going to be very, very, very long. But anyway, I guess my thinking is just that when we're talking about dividing things into tranches, it seems like you want something close to a project level, at least something close to a project level tranche, you know, or you know, at least have a tranche that has things grouped by projects and a number of projects in a tranche, you know, or even if they don't know exactly where, something close to that. I get concerned when you have so many tranches and they're a few feet long or 100 feet long, and how are we going to know which of those need to be grouped together that have to be done at the same time? So it's not practical for us to analyze some tranche that we don't know which tranche has to be done with another tranche at the same time. I guess that's my concern, and I wonder how we can improve what we're looking for in that way.
And just to add to that, when you have super granular tranches, and then you aggregate to a certain level, I think that's an interesting idea. But if the aggregate is so abstract and so high, or it aggregates so many of these super granular tranches together, then it's also not really very helpful. So it again comes back to this idea of what is a useful kind of baseline, a kind of a low level of tranching, and what is you know, a limit to the level of granularity that we want to see. And I think the limit on the granularity aspect is exactly what Wendy is just describing, that something at a project level makes really good sense. It helps for analysis as well. So that's, I think I'll leave it at that for now, because we do want to hear other you know, thoughts from different parties. Any other thoughts or feedback on this? I mean, we're, you know, excited to hear people continue this discussion in the replies and the comments. But if you have some thoughts right now, yeah, Jamie, go ahead.
It appears my video is not working. So sorry if you can't see me. I think this is a really interesting idea. I did want to just point out one observation, which is that it seems like the granularity of tranches isn't specific to post-test years, right? That seems to be more a granular comment, I think, that Katie's making with line 14 of the settlement, which it's not limited to the post-test year. So I just wanted to point that out in general. The second comment I wanted to make was generally about, I think Eric made a really good point about there's certain things that we know and there's certain things we don't know. And in rate cases and in ramps, generally, utilities make a lot of assumptions. Post-test year is even more so. And I just wanted to point out that when we submit a ramp and or a rate case, we're doing all of the project forecasting, I think that Wendy alluded to, years and years and years in advance. And when you add the post-test year, that's even more so in advance. So I think we don't disagree with a majority of what was said today. There's some balance, essentially, of providing granular projects in the post-test years with a degree of certainty, let alone then to do risk analysis on top of that.
Thanks, Jamie. I appreciate that. And I think it's actually a good point that this doesn't, this discussion about the granularity of tranches is not just limited to this new line 26 that we're considering, but it does go actually to the way that tranching is considered in general. And so maybe, if parties, and I'm not pointing a finger towards Katie and Eric, but when you guys are thinking about this, it might also be helpful if you could point us towards any language that you'd like to change elsewhere in the RDF. And just to make sure that while most of the language in that Appendix A from last December is similar to the settlement agreement, there are some changes. And so if you could please work from that appendix when you're making your adjustments to making your suggestions, I should say. It looks like PG&E has their hand up. Am I correct with that? Yeah. Oh,
and I should let you know, Vincent and I are actually in a conference room together, so we're sharing the same audio source here. But I just want to clarify a comment you made, right? Just to kind of stay within scope here. Want to stick to the proposed line item 26. I think I heard you say something like comments to the RDF as a whole. And that doesn't seem appropriate with what we are trying to accomplish with this discussion.
Yeah, that's also fair. I hear what you're saying, that this was meant to be a discussion that's strictly about post-test years. We'll potentially come back to that topic. We do have an optional workshop that we could come back to that topic if we need to. Yeah, but parties are allowed to discuss the post-test year.
No, absolutely. I see this line item number 26. I think, generally PG&E is agreeable. We didn't receive any feedback in our last ramp on how we provided RSEs on post-test years. We feel pretty comfortable. The slide previous, the recommendations generally seem fine, a little broad. Kind of understand where you're going. I see number 3 and how that has kind of translated into discussion here today, but just want to make sure we're considering the scope of this conversation appropriately. So thank you, Eddie.
Yeah, fair enough. In that context, I just want to make sure, Ken, that you're not asking us to limit the discussion of other parties, though, are you?
No. I just want to keep a frame of mind of where we are and who's on the line and what's appropriate as far as how far we open up the conversation.
Very good. I think on that note, we are at the 11 o'clock break, and if we'd like, we could take a quick 5-minute break and maybe come back. Maybe it'll jog some thoughts, and if there's no additional questions, then we can talk about what we're going to do for the rest of the morning. So how about we just take a quick 5-minute break and come back at 11:09. Does that sound good to everybody? Okay, great. All right. Oh my gosh, my voice cracked like a 13-year-old. Sorry about that. So we got Katie back online. I'm actually going to start off by apologizing. Wendy actually pointed out that I slightly misspoke earlier. The last decision, it's not that we don't allow weighting on safety or different attributes. It's just that there's no requirement to have a minimum weighting for safety. And that's the way that the previous MAVF worked. Just a quick clarification for that. Thank you, Wendy. I appreciate that. And I think I feel like we've kind of beaten the tranche issue around quite a bit here. And I wanted to quickly move us. I do have one, if any parties have additional questions they'd like to ask, that would be fine. But I actually also have one question that I'd like to throw out there just for a little bit of discussion, which was part of the planning questions, which was whether or not parties would consider a reporting template that the utilities should produce with the post-test year information. Is that something that parties see as being beneficial for including within a ramp filing? No? Comments? You can always come back to it in your opening comments and replies, but if you have any thoughts on that.
I'm sorry, I didn't raise my hand, so I'm speaking a little bit out of turn.
Go for it.
But I don't think we're opposed to a reporting template. I think, the more important piece is having the requirement. And then to the extent, that we come up with one between now and the comments, we would propose one.
Okay.
This is Dan from SE. Isn't there a workshop in October to talk ramp reporting templates? We feel like maybe it should be a all-inclusive, not just a post-test year one, but an all-together. And the transparency pilot also may have some other things that result in some type of template. So I just want to make sure that we consider all three of those together and don't maybe get a little ahead of ourselves. But
yeah, no, I think that's a great point, Dan. And one of the things that I think would be helpful is if folks could kind of point out what their thoughts are on what a template like that for post-test years in particular would be. So that way, when we get to that discussion in October, there's already some information that's out there for, because it's going to be Cal Advocates that's going to be leading that discussion. Yeah, maybe it'll be helpful for them to get some thoughts on that. And then we could always have additional feedback once they come up with their the specific recommended template that they're going to share with us in October. Does that jive with what you were thinking, Dan? Is that okay?
Yeah, thanks. That works.
Yeah, and I agree that probably this afternoon we're also going to be considering a little bit about what the templates are related to the transparency pilot, and that probably is also part of the discussion that is going to happen in October. Great. Any other thoughts from parties about templates? No? Okay. Is there any additional questions that anybody wanted to address within the post-test year topic? Yeah, if not, I will just open it up.
I have one if we have time.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Wendy.
I do have a question. Like when the utilities are calculating the benefits for the post-test years, and doing the cost benefit ratios, the ones that are doing it now, how do you consider what is going to be what is in a GRC where they address escalation of post-test years? How do you match that?
This is Dan from SE. At least I'll take an initial stab. I mean, the ramp is not a funding mechanism, so we provide budget-based forecasts. And in our rate case, we also provide post-year forecasts, but we may also provide a post-test year mechanism or something that may not necessarily be budget-based. So you know, there are instances where we may ask for budget base. We may ask for an escalation rate based on some indice or something of that nature. So I think it varies depending.
But when you're doing, if you're doing the RSCs or the CBRs in the future for post-test years, you have to assume some kind of escalation, correct?
I mean, once again, if we were providing budget-based forecasts, we would have that dollar amount for each year that we would then put into the, you know, the RSE or the PCR calculation that would, you know, de-escalate and escalate based on, you know, either a weighted average cost of capital or something of that nature.
So you don't see it as an issue with the post-test year CBRs? You don't, is that what I'm understanding, Dan?
I guess, what do you mean issue?
You don't see there could potentially be like a big difference between what's in your RC or CBR, how you've calculated the cost into the post-test years versus how it could be done in the GRC. I mean, because in the GRC, you would have two things. You would have your post-test year mechanism for everything, right, in the GRC, and then for your risk analysis, you would also need that some kind of assumption in your risk analysis if you're calculating post-test year risk CBRs or RSCs. Does that make sense?
I think so. I'm definitely not our risk analysis expert, and I think we probably will have more of them on this afternoon. We have our GRC PHC hearing this morning. So maybe it'd be better to circle back or address those in comments, just because I want to make sure that I'm accurate in what I say here from the risk analysis. So
I appreciate that. Would PG&E be able to weigh in?
I'm Hello, can you hear me?
A bit of an echo.
We're not hearing you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's better.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you, Vincent. You're good.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I think I need a little bit more clarification. I'm not sure I totally understand the issue as well. So sorry it takes so long to say that.
Sure. So for PG&E, when you're calculating say RSCs, you know, now, and you take risk reduction divided by the cost, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're doing that for post-test years, you're having to assume some kind, I mean, I think you're assuming some kind of escalation in those post-test years for that cost and out for the calculation of the RSCs, correct?
Yeah, I mean, it's I think it's kind of similar to what Dan says, combination of escalations and then, you know, like kind of the program trajectory, so on and so forth. Yeah.
And then I guess my question is, how do you match up to what PG&E, you know, would ask for a general kind of escalation for their programs in the GRC? Is there any conflict or any issue that those might be divergent?
I think we strive to make it consistent. I don't exactly know how the secret sauce is made, but we do strive to make it consistent. We do have a business finance team that you know, kind of in charge of all the forecasts that we are using. So that's how we achieve the consistency. I can't talk about the intricacies of how they do that, but I do know we do try to make it consistent so that our ask is consistent with our kind of the numbers you see in our RSCs.
Could I ask a follow-up to that, Wendy? Does that mean then, Vincent, that essentially you're developing your risk assessment, including the post-test year, and how you're thinking about post-test years? Initially, you're thinking of that separately from what your business development folks are doing. And then they take your assessment and they develop an escalation in terms of costs and how that's going to play out within the GRC.
Yeah, so I mean, like, risk-informed kind of decision making is kind of evolving at PG&E, but it's the programs, the trajectory is something we consider among other factors, among other priorities to develop the kind of a forecast.
Okay.
But we do, yeah, there are other considerations as well.
Okay. Does that help answer the question for you, Wendy?
Yeah, it helps answer. I just kind of want to bring it up as something to think about when you're thinking about post-test years, and it's something that I've been thinking about. So thanks.
Great, thanks. Okay. Does anybody else? I'll just open it one more time for general questions for discussion. Glad that we were able to eat into at least 20 minutes of the 11 o'clock hour. If there's no other general questions, I'll first ask, just as a matter of principle, is it possible to begin the transparency pilot discussion, or will we need to wait until after lunch? And I'm mainly aiming this at Dan, because I believe it's the SCE folks who may still.
I think we would prefer our PHC, I believe, is still going on, talking to some of my coworkers here. So
yeah.
I realize we are a little early, but we would prefer just some of our speakers can be available in the afternoon.
That's okay. I will be happy to give everybody an extra 40 minutes at lunch, as long as everyone is in agreement that that's a good way to go. Don't hear any dissent. So I think that we will, for now, take a nice hour and 40-minute long lunch, and we will swing back to start this at 1 o'clock. And before we go, I just wanted to say thank you to Commissioner Reynolds for joining us. I know that he needed to bounce off after lunch. Did you have any additional words that you wanted to add, Commissioner?
I think for me, I really appreciate everyone's participation and the continuing dialogue with me.
Excellent. Thanks. Very good. I will see everyone then at 1 o'clock. I will keep everything open, and so if you have any questions or concerns, you can send them into the chat and let me know, and I will try to be as responsive as I can over lunchtime. All right. Thanks, everybody. See you in a bit.
Thanks, Eddie. Be sure to grab some lunch yourself.
I will. Thanks, Dan. Go make some noodles. Oh, thank you guys. I appreciate that. Let's see. Chris, are you planning to do the presentation for SCE?
I'll be co-presenting with Gary Cheng of our offices. We have 2 slides. I'll be doing 1 slide and the subjects in it, and then Gary will do the other.
Great.
Thank you.
Yep. Let's see. Yep, it looks like the folks from PG&E are still online. Can you hear us, guys? They're still muted. Oh, there's Ken. Hey, buddy. Oh, still muted. No, not sure.
Doing a quick mic check, Eddie. Does this
Yep,
work?
that works. And you can hear us?
Thank you. Absolutely. Yes, sir.
All right, great. Folks, a couple more minutes come back from lunch. 2. Yeah, and Jake is still online. Okay, great. And you can hear us okay, Jake?
Yep, I can hear you.
Suzanne with us too? No. Well, try to get us started so that we're slightly on time. And there'll probably be some folks trickling in. I just wanted to mention that I'll be taking notes today for this workshop. So if I'm not looking at the camera, it's not because I'm not paying attention, but it's because I'm old school and I still do pen and paper and transfer to computer later, but not great at typing and listening at the same time. Okay, so for today in the afternoon, we are going to discuss the transparency pilot, and we're going to have 3 different presentations. The first is going to be PG&E, as we mentioned this morning. For those of you who are with us this morning, PG&E is going to give us a basic rundown of their original pilot structure from D2109-11. I hope I got that right. And then SCE is going to give us a bit of a run through on the pilot that they test drove during their 2022 ramp, which was also distributed through the service list for this proceeding on June 14th. And then Steve Haynes from SPD is going to give us a brief presentation on his key observations from SCE's drive through or run through of that pilot. We'll take a brief break. Well, actually, we'll take a kind of a mid-sized break around 2:15, and let folks stretch their legs and think a little bit, and come back and have a discussion for about an hour. We can go a little bit longer if we need to, but I'll have a few closing remarks at the end, and we can still have a bit of discussion there at the end as well. For now, also, if you do have any IT problems, I just wanted to re-up this contact information for Marcos Rodriguez, who is our IT specialist for this workshop. If you have any problems, feel free to reach out to Marcos either in the chat or you can send him an email. And I think I'll turn it over to PG&E. I see Vincent's video is up, so I'm going to hand it over to him, and I'll move the slides to where we need to go.
First off, can folks hear me? Am I coming across
Yep.
loud and clear?
Yeah, you
Okay,
sound.
thank you. I had to get off from using Ken's computer. It was a bit too personalized for my taste. Too much finger funk on his keyboard. I had to get away. So I had to pull up on my own computer. So anyway, sorry if there was any. That was what was going on last time where you couldn't hear me. I just had to switch computers. But anyway, here we are. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So, looking back at the D21 decision, basically the proposal that we had put forward over there was, the direction there was basically for, Edison to pilot the proposal that we had put forth. And in thinking about this topic for today, I was kind of thinking of, well, what would make the most sense? I think one of the things that we should do to help kind of set the context, right? The kind of establish once again, why we had posed this, what kind of questions we wanted to answer with this proposal. We had kind of done it the first time around with back in 2021, but I think, well, now we have the data, right? We can give it another try. And I think hopefully it'll be a bit more, contextual because, we have some kind of data that we can pile it on, we can look at. But once again, that's kind of like, the approach that we took, and then also like, what kind of analysis are we trying to do with this data, right? First approach is basically, the idea is to have the information in tabular, normalized tabular data formats that we can then use, go crazy with Excel and pivot tables, Excel data and pivot tables analysis, right? So I think that's the way to go because then participants, anybody wants to look at it, they can get to the questions and answer the questions, in a kind of self-directed, on their own. So that's basically the approach. So the next question is basically, the questions that we wanted to try to answer with these, this data set that we're putting out there, this proposal that we're putting out there, you can see basically clustered around these kind of four kind of questions, right? So where should we focus our modeling efforts? We know, I think all of the IOUs know, we know that, the quality of our data, the maturity of our analysis, varies. There is some models are more mature than others. Some parameters are more mature than others. Some parameters are going to have a lot of uncertainty around there. So, I think a productive question to ask is where we should be focusing our modeling efforts. So kind of related questions that, well, what are the quality of the assumptions that we're using right now? When I mean assumptions, that's basically input parameters, right? You can think of it, basically you have model as inputs and as outputs, right? So first question you want to ask is, okay, what is the quality of the inputs? What's the quality of the stuff we're putting into the model? And then the other thing is, okay, we can figure out what the quality is, but does it matter, right? How much does that matter? If we were to work on improving the quality of this certain input assumptions, is it going to make a difference in the end when we look at the risk scores? Is it going to change our analysis substantially? So we want to know that up front before we kind of direct our efforts. So really, that's one of the questions that this table hopefully can answer. And when I talk about quality, originally when we had the discussions in 2021, we kind of settled on a I would say objective but kind of qualitative criteria for quality, right? So it's hard to right now, this is after all a continuing kind of improvement kind of thing, it's a continuing process to get to the answers. But I think the group kind of settled on the first step, a good first step of having like a kind of criteria, an objective criteria for determining whether a certain input assumption like wildfire mitigation effectiveness for undergrounding, that might be an input assumption. We have an objective but still qualitative criteria for what it means to be high quality, medium quality, low quality, right? So that's what we mean here by quality. We're kind of going to try to categorize, classify the results and the assumptions in high, medium, low using a set of objective criteria. And then other questions we might want to ask is, how good is the quality of the models themselves, right? We have the inputs, the outputs, inputs of model, the outputs. Well, we need to ask the box itself. How good are we with that box? And then finally, you want to look at the outputs, right? How good is the quality of the risk scores? So that's risk scores. I say risk scores, but they can be RSEs in general, based or other results that we're putting out there. So how good is the quality of the risk scores, given all the uncertainty, all the input quality, the model quality, so on and so forth. So basically, the proposal was intended to answer questions like this. Any questions so far? Otherwise, we can move on to the next one. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. So how do we do that? So in the proposal, we had proposed kind of these three data tables that you can then use with Excel pivot tables. That's the risk results table, risk sensitivity analysis table, and then finally the risk model listing table. And then I talked about earlier, a slide ago, I talked about, the estimate quality criteria. We also had a bunch of criteria that we put out there to kind of assess the different kind of results that or inputs that we're using. So the rest of this presentation is basically I'm going to try to illustrate different kinds of analysis that we can do with these three tables and how they answer the questions. Any questions on this slide? Okay, next slide, please. Okay, first up, there's this risk results table. And this basically is the kind of design of the table. So these are the columns you can see that the table has. And I don't want to dive into the details of all these results. We've thought about this for a while, and I think there's a lot of detail here. I don't think we necessarily need to go through each and every one of those columns, but basically, I think the best way to do that is actually to look at the next slide ahead. But basically, so if you can move to the next slide. Is this the next slide? Yeah. So basically, yes, thank you. So basically, the idea here is that the risk results table basically allows you to do aggregations of various forms, right? So here, this is once again based on the test pilot that Edison put out. I should say that, I'm not a close follower of Edison RAMP or GRC. So these scores, these are just what they have, and I'm just using this example to illustrate the kind of things that you can do. I can't speak to whether 47.61 is or what that means. So basically, the idea is here. The table would allow us to do things like, for example, aggregating the risk scores across the tranches, across the different years, right? So you would have across the different test years. So you would have, for example, overall risk score for 2025, 47.61, and for 2026, 43.68. And you can see that I kind of pivoted it based on the different risks that you have out there. So I only chose wildfire. That's one thing you can look at. And then there's different results types that if you go back to the previous slide, like we kind of envision all these different result types that we would have, right? So it could be like RSEs. I guess it's not on this table, but things a result type would be like RSE or baseline risk result and so on and so forth. So there will be all these different result types. So you can drill on the result that you're looking for, be it RSE, be it risk score, and then kind of drill in to see what the aggregate of those, the slicing and dicing looks like. If you could go to the next slide again. And the kind of design for this table, I believe the table, I have to refresh my memory, but I believe the result, the kind of original motivation for this table, this risk result table was kind of, we looked at the turn proposals for templates, and we were like, yeah, a lot of the templates can be accomplished with the pivot tables. I think we can, build a flexible kind of approach for us to look at the risk scores and other aggregates in a kind of very effective way. Any questions so far? Okay, next screen. So one of the questions that we had, basically, kind of question was, how good is the quality of the risk scores, right? And here you can see some way that we can kind of illustrate the quality here. I know it's kind of small, but based on the data set that Edison provided, you can see once again we're focusing on wildfire. You can see at the top of the top of the pivot table there that it's wildfire that we're looking at, and then if we're focusing on 2025, we're looking at the risk after mitigation, and we're looking at risk across all the three attributes, right? So you can see here that according to this test pilot, one of the risks here has a low quality in terms of the calculation type, right? In terms of the calculation. So for example, you look at my eyesight's really bad, but I think it says high Z. I think it says high Z, right? So the high Z risk results might not be our rank as having a low quality using the kind of criteria that we had put forward. So other mitigations as far as the risk values are concerned have better quality, medium quality, and certain ones like the REFCO seems to have high quality. So basically, the idea is this could help you zoom in on which of the things you want to explore in terms of data quality. Because it's also, then the next question is like, it's like you would take these numbers, this result, this categorization, and you would look at, what makes up the modeling for this high Z mitigation. And, you could kind of zoom in to then look at the inputs and the modeling itself for the high Z mitigation and see, where are the pin down the sources of leading to the low quality for the calculations. Okay, so once again, any questions so far? Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Once again, so here we have the risk sensitivity table. This is the second of the tables that we have proposed. Once again, with this table, there is quite a lot of detail. We worked thought extensively about what should go into this table, how to normalize it so that we'll be able to make it effective in terms of Sorry about that.
It's all good.
Hey, Eddie, I don't think was that us?
Yeah, I think so. I think it came from.
That's just because we're on the commission's line, and I just wanted to hold, or.
I think it was somebody's phone. Actually, it sounded like you guys might have gone on hold.
I don't think so.
I just hit the mute button.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, great, thank you.
Hit the mute button, so it worked.
Okay, so once again, I won't delve into this table too much. I don't think that's a good use of our time here. So I'll move on to kind of illustrate on the next slide what, how this table answers some of the questions in the planning questions. So if you can move to the next slide. So one thing I wanted to mention, originally one of the central questions that we had put up there was, what is the quality of the modeling assumptions and all input parameters, and does it matter, right? So the intent was to measure, how do we determine whether something matters or not, right? So that's one measure of that, I guess, is sensitivity. And when we meant sensitivity, basically, we kind of mean the slope. So you can see here in this case, the transparency proposal, kind of basically the idea is that, you would take the input parameter you're thinking about. In this case, there's an example here. It says mitigation low effectiveness for veg contact, right? That's one of the input assumptions in the wildfire model. So the idea is that, you would kind of perturb that parameter a little bit. Maybe it's set at 5% now. I don't know what it's set at, but maybe it's 5%, 20%, whatever it is. You would perturb it a little bit, maybe push it up from 5% to 8%, and leave everything else the same, but just push that factor up to 8%. And then you see what it does to the risk score, RSE, whatever result you're measuring. So that would give you an idea of, if I move this so much, this is gonna be the change. And the whole idea why we're doing that is we're really trying to measure the sensitivity, right? The slope, right? That's the idea here. When I looked at the results from Edison, and I looked at the original proposal, I think originally we had set out to kind of address our original intent for the perturbation, how much to move that input parameter around. That was originally we decided we proposed, we should just have a kind of standard plus minus 10%. I think that was our proposal. But I think, after talking with the CWG, with this group, we decided that we would go with a 10 kind of 90th percentile value and then 10 percentile value for the high case and low case, right? So basically, I think when we made the change, we kind of came up with a high case output and a low case output to go along with the high case value and the low case value. But I think we didn't really calculate a slope. So what I was able to do from Edison's pilot was basically, I was able to pick out the high case values and pick out the low case values. Those were in there already, but there wasn't any description of, what does that 90th percentile look like for the high case input. I didn't know what the value was. I didn't know what the 10% value for the low case input was. Thankfully, Edison had some comments in the proposal, and I was able to read their comments and say, they varied in the high case, they moved their input parameter, and this particular input parameter, they might have moved it from 5% to 11%. That was the high case. And then in the low case, they move it down to 1%. So I was able to strip out or pass out all the text comments that they wrote there. And then that, along with the high case value and the low case value, allowed me to calculate the slope over that broad range of movement that they provided. So I think one recommendation is we can kind of clarify that is in fact the slope that we're trying to calculate here, right? So, and I think the slope, like I mentioned earlier, there are various ways of defining the slope. One is just assume a fixed percentage move plus minus 10%, or the other case is basically using these percentiles. And I guess, we can settle on either method, can settle on one method, can use both methods. But the more important thing is that we should calculate the slope. So, what does the slope mean, right? And what does the slope mean? I think the slope in itself maybe has some meaning. The pure value numbers have some meaning, but I think more important is to understand, to use that slope to rank the sensitivity of the inputs, which parameters matter the most. So the higher the slope, it's like, oh yeah, if I change this parameter by just a little bit, it's going to lead to huge changes in the risk score. So this is the parameter I want to focus on. And then we kind of look at that parameter and look at, oh, what's the quality of that parameter? What's the estimate quality of the parameter? Is it a high quality estimate? Is it a low quality estimate? And if it's a low quality estimate, then it's, yeah, maybe, we need to build a plan to improve, how we estimate that parameter to begin with. So that's the whole kind of intent of the risk sensitivity table. So you can see that basically kind of hopefully in action here. And here you can see I took the wildfire risk, and it's by tranche, and it's also by attributes, and also what we're focusing on, right? So by mitigation. So I basically did what I was talking about. I calculated the sensitivities given the low and high quality. Given the high and low results that Edison provided, and the high and low cases for the inputs that Edison had in their comments. So that, and I once again, I was parsing text really. So whether I got that right or not, it remains to be seen. But one of the things is I calculated that sensitivity, and I basically just sorted it. You can see I just created an Excel table, I just sorted it. So basically what this kind of tells me is that, as far as sensitivity is concerned, the things that I should be looking at for wildfire is I should be focusing on is this tranched, this mitigation, right? Incident management and learning, this mitigation, the parameter for that mitigation seems to affect the risk score quite highly. So maybe we should focus on that to take a look at, whether we want to kind of improve the quality of the estimate. And so you can see here, it's just, once again, the sensitivity, the number as itself, what is that number? 90,126, the first number. I can't really ascribe a meaning to that because I'm not that familiar with Edison data, but this ranking does give me some idea of where I want to start looking at in terms of parameters to focus on. Next slide. Finally, I think this is one of the tables. This table was something I think you can have brought up in terms of understanding I hope that was the case. Understanding the quality of the models that we're actually using, right? And so I think this table was in response to that question, if my memory serves me correctly. But basically, it's a listing of all the models that we're employing and using the criteria that we had established, how we would basically categorize these models in terms of high, medium, or low quality in terms of maturity. So let's move on to the next slide. Once again, an illustration of what's going on. An example here. So you can see here, it's a listing. So here you can see for how Edison characterized their modeling, the different models involved in putting together the risk scores. And you can see that there's a high, medium, low column there. And here basically, once again, you can get an idea of, in general, the Edison's assessment on the maturity of the model for the different components of their risk analysis. No questions, we'll move to the next slide.
I do have a question. This is Eric from Safety Policy Division. So, I see this is great to see the sensitivity analysis, and also that by looking at all these different tranches, that to understand the relationship between different mitigation measures versus the possible risk being reduced. So, as we know that at some location that there are multiple wildfire mitigation measures being applied, such as that if you have a cover conductor plus the vegetation management. So how do you evaluate the collective risk reduction from multiple mitigation measures, and how do you differentiate that which one is the major driver that give the most effectiveness of the risk reduction, and how do you compare the one dimension of the risk reduction versus the combination of a multiple mitigation measures that result into the better risk reduction?
Yeah, I think, let me see if I can restate your question. You're kind of looking at the kind of cross effects, right, of mitigations. You might have multiple mitigations addressing one risk, and how do you figure out the cross? So I see, basically originally this proposal, if I might get technical here, this proposal originally we used a small percent change, right? Because what we were doing, we were calculating the first derivatives. Originally, we were going to calculate first derivatives. So we weren't going to calculate cross terms, like the second derivatives. I think that's what you're talking about, how to look at the impact of both mitigations together. And so kind of, I think about it like that would be like a cross derivative. That's not what we were, that's something that I think this proposal doesn't get to, but I think at least it gives you the kind of biggest 2 or 3 drivers to focus on, and then you can kind of go further and explore that. And that's kind of also the second point about that, I think, is that each IOU kind of does that calculation a little differently. So there's also that aspect of it, which is why we didn't address that in the original proposal.
Thank you.
I'll just I'm not even sure how I raised my hand as the host, but I will just mention that actually this also touches a little bit on interacting risk drivers. And that's actually a topic for phase 4 of this proceeding. So we will actually be coming back to that topic eventually. And I would imagine that it would have implications for the transparency pilot when we come back to that. That's right to you, Vincent?
We can calculate a lot of cross terms as well. It just makes the table bigger, makes another table, we need another table probably. And, then you're doing basically these Cartesian product things, right? So the table is going to explode, so it's like, I think, like I said, this is a first go round. So that was the idea, let's keep it manageable first time round. And also you mentioned the interacting drivers is another thing. I think we do them a little differently. So let's understand that first before we kind of work some more and put that into this proposal. But thank you, that was a great question.
Are there any other questions? Just clarifying questions. What, was that your last slide, Vincent, or is there one more?
Let's see. Are there any other? I think that was.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Okay, here we go. Yeah. Estimate quality. So last thing that we wanted to mention was that, how do we assess high, medium, low quality, right? Remember, quality was kind of qualitative categorization, high, medium, low. I mean, it is qualitative, but, we wanted to put some objectivity towards how to determine. So we had originally proposed this criteria. I think one of the things is, I think the group here can kind of consider this proposal, not necessarily need to kind of go through all the details here, but just consider if there's anything that would suggest we do differently as far as the criteria is concerned. And yeah, there's no questions. And
just
so there are other questions. Oh, sorry, Eric. Yeah.
On the last side, I think it says proxy data. So that's saying that it's data that's related to the risk event, but not exactly the risk event, or what do you mean by that?
So basically, I think proxy data could be like data that we use that industry data that we might not have events, concerning PG&E, but we could look at data from other industries other utilities.
Okay, thanks.
So some of the questions we answered on the slides. I think you saw at the bottom of the previous slide. So those were the kind of planning questions we were going to answer. There's some other questions on that came out on planning questions 2.4, 2.5, 2.8. So just putting it out there, and these are the things that you know, we haven't specifically addressed in the slides you saw previously, but these also are the questions that are out there right now. Okay, with that, I turn it over to Chris.
Yep, sounds good. We can keep moving.
Okay, thank you very much, Vince. And if we could have the next slide, please. Good afternoon. This is Chris Vias with Southern California Edison. Thank you all for your time today and for the thought exchanges. Much appreciated. We're going to just briefly go over some aspects of our test drive of the PG&E transparency proposal. I'm just going to go over a couple of the overall parameters and the timeline that led us here. And my colleague Gary Cheng then will be offering some feedback at a more detailed level regarding, you know, what we experienced during and as we analyzed the test drive that we undertook. So if we could have the next slide, please. So, you know, how did we get to here with the transparency proposal? Just wanted to kind of level set with that. First, when SCE was directed to test drive this PG&E transparency proposal, as you see at the top of the slide, the commission made a specific finding that the results and the work product of SCE are intended to be purely information only. And we were also directed to serve our completed work product in our ramp proceeding and to do so within 60 days after we filed our ramp report. We did so, and then approximately a year later, close to, we were directed now to file a copy of it in the risk OIR docket, and we did do so. I would also just note that after we filed this transparency proposal work product in the ramp proceeding, during the succeeding period of many months, we did not receive discovery or other inquiries with regard to our product. So the ramp docket was rather silent with regard to it. So that's kind of how an overall setting of the parameters. And now I'm going to turn it over to Gary Cheng.
Thanks, Chris. Audio check. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Any questions for Chris before we go to the next slide? Slide, please. Thanks. So what I want to do is spend a few minutes discussing just high-level general observations on how how SCE approached filling in the three risk tables. So our data table number 1 talked about risk results. So a couple of general observations when we filled in this table. I think it's often good when we say a year, whether that meant that the risk score is the January 1st of that year or December 31st of that year, just to level set what it means when we have a year. Maybe another clarifying is that this should only be for the proposed portfolio, I would assume. When we filled out the risk tables, we only filled in according to the risk results in terms of the likelihood of risk event before, likelihood of risk event after. So we did not put RSE in this specific table. So that's kind of why we'll talk about RSEs in data table number 2. This is where we put the RSE estimates because we did not put it into the risk results data table number 1. And as Vince alluded to, there was some interpretation necessary in terms of understanding sensitivity and scenario. So let me take a few minutes to discuss what SCE's view on sensitivity is. If you look at the data table below on sensitivity, assuming you have the original effectiveness was 5, 10, and 15%, we've used sensitivity runs as basically a plus or minus 1%, for example. We can choose whatever number, 5% or 1%, above the original effectiveness value. So for example, sensitivity run number 1, we went from 5 to 6%, and we held everything else constant. In sensitivity run number 2, we held everything constant except for driver B, where we just increased it by 1%. So you can do that analogously for a negative sensitivity run, right? For example, if we had original 5%, if we had negative sensitivity, maybe it goes down to 4%, but everything else remains constant. So that's what we mean by sensitivity. Another way to think about is really a scenario run where we, based on our subject matter expertise, that they would say the low range would be maybe a 9%, or a high range would maybe 9%, and then the low range would be 1%. So we would basically do two runs, one high scenario run and another run, which is a low scenario run. So for purposes of filling in this risk sensitivity table, we populated multiple risks with different runs. A number of risks were done using the sensitivity runs, and a number of risks were done using the scenario runs to give readers and participants really a flavor of what it means to do those two different types of runs. And for data table number 3, the only observations we had was, if we were to include distribution parameters, we shouldn't just say it was a log normal or parallel. We should really inform, for example, what were the parameters, the mean, standard deviation, as appropriate. So that's really at a high level our general observations feedback, and willing to entertain questions right now.
Hi, Gary. Thanks. I just had a question on the high and low scenario. How does that get defined?
So our SMEs, we would ask our SMEs, what's your general, what's your range, for example, of mitigation effectiveness? So this is really focused on mitigation effectiveness.
But can you attach a number to the high and the low? Is it like, I think that this is like the 99% and the 1%, or is it like the 10% and the...
I think we asked them for a 90% confidence.
Okay, so it's like 10-9.
Sure.
Yeah, and that was... Oh, I'm sorry. I think and that was what we saw.
Go ahead, Vince. Yeah, and just sort of, adding into what Vincent was saying earlier about the sensitivity and the slope and so forth, I think you really do want both values. You want to get the slope at the measured value, and you want to get the slope between the extreme values as well. I think those are both useful pieces of information.
Dr. Mitchell, I was actually thinking one or the other, but like two is, I guess we could do them both.
Yeah. Well, it's because the curve can have a funny shape. You don't really know what the curve is shaped like. And you, without capturing the entire curve, you at least get two sort of limits there.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, Eric, go ahead.
Could you explain how you think about so let's take the high versus low mitigation effectiveness. How do you think about the confidence that you have with those different scenarios? For example, is it always the case that the high mitigation effectiveness has a lower confidence than the low mitigation effectiveness?
Could you expound upon that a little bit? What do you mean by
like,
when we ask our subject matter expertise? For example, if you're doing something like a 90% confidence, right? So you basically have 5% on the left and right tails, and the idea is that 90% of the time, the mitigation effectiveness would fall within that 90% distribution.
Okay, so
Perhaps if we go back a couple of slides to the risk sensitivity table, and can help answer the question for Eric. I'm sure you'll get it once you see the table. A couple of slides back. one more slide. So basically, this is how the table is laid out, right? So for each of the parameters, you would make an estimate quality, and then you would also provide the positive sensitivity and the negative sensitivity. So it's not like there's a quality estimate quality for the positive sensitivity and a separate one for the negative sensitivity. You just have this one parameter. It's low quality. Let's assume. Let's say it's low quality. So if it's low quality, then what the negative sensitivity tells you, like, if I move it to its 10th percentile value, this is how it would change the risk score. If I move it to its 90th percentile value, this is how it would change the risk score. And with those two values, you know, and if you know what you moved it to on the lower side and the upper side, you can calculate the slope. Then that answers the question. Okay, now I know this estimate is low quality. Does it matter, right? And how we will assess whether it matters or not as we look at the slope. So that's how this hope that answers the question.
Could I ask just a quick follow-up then? If the negative sensitivity is where you would report the low end and the positive sensitivity is the high end, where would you record the slope in the table actually?
So yeah, so that's the thing we were mentioning, right? If you go, I think was it one slide forward?
Right.
Go one slide forward. Right now we don't calculate the slope as far as and that's why the recommendation at the bottom is, you know, we should calculate that slope. Okay. So that I calculated it because I was able to read the comments off of Edison's test drive, and you know, and like I said, I basically wrote some Excel code. I don't know how good it was to pass through the text comments that Edison had, right? And they were kind enough to provide, you know, what they use for the low case and what they use for the high case. But we should kind of formalize that what we're really after, the slope.
Thanks. Anybody else have a follow-up on that particular topic? No? Are there any additional questions for SCE? We're a little ahead of schedule. Just got plenty of time. Okay. If not, oh, yep. Dr. Mitchell, please.
Yeah. One thing I just was wondering is how is the change from RSE framework to a monetized cost benefit going to change the implementation?
Is this a question for Vince? Or?
Yeah, sorry, I'm still trying to work out the technical things here, but I don't think it's going to change that much because, I mean, you're still just calculating first derivatives, right? You can always find a first derivative for whatever result that you're putting out there.
Okay. I was also wondering, you know, based on experience and so forth, you know, SE has gone through this. What information did this analysis bring out that wouldn't have otherwise been in the RAMP or WMP filings? That's a question to Gary or Ken.
Yeah.
Could you repeat that question? Sorry.
Sure. What information did this analysis bring out that wouldn't have been in the WMP or RAMP filings anyway?
I think two things that pop into my head is really, I don't see anywhere in the RAMP or WMP where we talk about sensitivity, right, or scenario now or sensitivity runs, right, plus or minus 1% or 5%. I'm not too sure that's. I saw that in any of the WMP or RAMP requirements. And the other, perhaps other part is the estimate qualities. However, I would say that in our RAMP filings, we do discuss where we got, how do we come up with, for example, the driver frequency, how do we come up with the consequence, but this is just really assigning whether it's high, medium, or low. But I would say that in our RAMP work papers, we do describe where we got each of our individual sets of numbers. So this is just really more of a categorization of some of the inputs that we have already provided in our work papers.
Okay. So what changes would make this a more useful exercise?
I would ask the parties if they've had time to review and what changes they think would be helpful.
Well, I was more wondering about SCE's experience with it. I mean, the parties can also come in, but you've gone through the work, you've done it. What would have made this more useful or easier or helped you with this analysis or made it more complete?
That's a great question. I think it takes time to compile all this data, number one. And I think also it takes time to do all the sensitivity runs. So whether, again, we were doing this for informational purposes, it's not like we spent, we did analyze the data, but it wasn't one of the core things that we, spent a whole lot of time on.
Okay, thanks.
Can I jump in here to answer your question, Dr. Mitchell? One thing that would have made the test drive more complete would have been for the utility to provide the same kind of analysis and information for the alternative portfolios in addition to the main proposed portfolio. Right now, in the SCE test drive, they only provided information for the proposed portfolio. So I think to make it more complete, we would also like to see the same kind of analysis and the same kind of information on the alternative portfolios.
Yeah, Eric. Actually, could I just real quick? I noticed that Matthew Smith actually had a question in the chat. I want to make sure that it gets asked, and it's I believe it's directed at Vincent, and it's, can you explain how the risk-benefit metrics and modeling are used in establishing annual capital expenditure budgets, and are there any cost of service limits in developing annual capital expenditure budgets? If anybody has an answer for that. If not, Matthew, maybe you could reach out to the utilities offline and they can help answer that question for you. Okay. Let's see. Eric, I saw your hand up. Go up first.
Yeah, well, it was kind of similar to Stephen's. And I was just wondering, this might be more for SPD or the utilities, but is part of this transparency effort also trying to look at how easy it is for parties to input their own proposals into utility risk calculations, or do you view that as a separate topic?
Well, for us, I think once again kind of laid it out in those central questions, right? It's basically like which are the parameters we should be focusing on. It's a model, has a set of inputs, provides a set of outputs. This is basically a way to guide, our team in terms of where we should be focusing our modeling efforts. So I don't want to mention, I'm just looking in terms of PG&E's performance, PG&E's perspective, how it could be useful to us to help us to work with our teams internally to kind of narrow down the things that we want to focus on in terms of improving the quality of our estimates.
Well, I have, I think, an even more general question just about, and I apologize if this is obvious, but in terms of this transparency effort, is part of this, and maybe this is a question to SPD, just trying to get at, is one element of this potentially, how easy is it for parties to input different assumptions or variations on utility proposals. Because Stephen brought up, well, we'd like to see this for the utility alternate proposals, but what about, if other parties want to have their proposals? And if you don't feel that that's relevant to this effort, then I'd just appreciate knowing that.
I think it's something that we can go back and talk about a little bit.
Okay.
At this point, we haven't had that discussion, but we'll keep it in mind. And
maybe I could bring it up at the end too, if that's best. But it's important, I think, and I can explain why more if we have time at the end.
All right, that sounds good. Yeah, Chris, why don't you go ahead? And we can't hear you, Chris, if you're speaking.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're good.
Sorry, I just had to fix the mic there. Just two sort of points of clarification. One is that when we're looking at these questions, and appreciate the different configuration of the questions, kind of pushing and pulling on this like it's taffy. And I would just note that per the slide that I presented, we did this work product after we developed our ramp information and data and developed our ramp. And we really did this work in the 60-day period after we had filed our ramp. So it's a little bit different, when we're answering questions of what could this have been or that have been, I just want to be clear that this was in data and work product SCE developed post-filing of its ramp for informational purposes, not as part of our ramp development process. It's in and of itself. The ramp development process, of course, had to focus on meeting the directives and requirements of the commission. Thanks.
All right, we've got still 5 more minutes, but there's no additional questions. We can also have Steve present his key observations, and we can take a quick break and come back and continue some discussion. All right, Steve, why don't you go ahead? I'll move you forward to the slide.
Okay.
There you go.
Next slide, please. This probably should have gone at the very beginning of this discussion. So a little background on how this all came about was Turn in phase 1 of this proceeding made some suggestions on how to make the GRC and the ramp process more transparent. And in one of those, or in a couple of those TWG meetings, Turn suggested how to make the process more transparent, and Turn listed 3 key features of a transparent process. Before I dive into those 3 features, I want to describe or define what transparent means in a GRC and ramp process. For a ramp process to be transparent, it means a utility in the RAM and GRC filings already includes in its filing papers and work papers and application documents already includes in those documents information that the utilities and other stakeholders would seek without doing additional rounds of very voluminous and time-consuming data requests to seek those data. So to have standardized templates where the utility already includes those information would make the process go so much more smoothly and much more quickly. So that's the key impetus behind the transparent process, to have the information already included in the original filings. Now, Turn listed 3 key features of a transparent process. The first one is repeatability results. The IOU should provide information sufficient that a stakeholder can repeat the calculations and arrive at roughly the same results. The second feature deals with providing uncertainty, characterizing the uncertainties of those estimates and the information and the uncertainties related to the data, the quality of the data, the quality of the models, parameters. And the third one deals with risk analysis. The risk analysis should be sufficiently granular. So the commission incorporated transparency as a topic in phase 1 of the SMAP OIR. And the commission asked parties to submit transparency proposals. TURN and PG&E submitted competing proposals. And SPD reviewed those 2 proposals and selected the PG&E proposal and as the dominant proposal, and it also incorporated features from the TURN proposal and combined those features into a modified proposal, which is based largely on the original PG&E proposal, but incorporated additional features in the TURN proposal. And that modified version of the proposal was adopted by the commission for the test drive. And SCE was selected as the first IOU to test drive that proposal, the modified proposal. Next slide, please. So there is, right off the bat, there is a slight mistake in the third bullet, but I'll talk about it later. So there are 3 elements in the transparency proposal. The first one is the risk results table, which Vincent already described. So the second one is the sensitivity analysis table. So I won't take a lot of time to regurgitate what Vincent already described. So I'm just going to move very quickly through the slide. The last bullet is actually a mistake. It's actually should have been the risk model listing table. So that's a mistake there. Next slide, please. I made some very high-level observations of the SCE submission. Largely, the SCE submission fulfilled the objective. SCE fulfilled its obligation to fill in the fields in all those proposed in the templates. Where there was deficiency was largely related to those fields in the templates dealing with confidence levels, confidence intervals. There's an echo there. Someone, please turn off your phone. Okay.
I already muted her. You're good.
Okay. So where there is where the effort really I felt fell short was some of the fields were not filled out properly because and that was a direct result of the selection of the parameters for the sensitivity analysis and the input being not based on probability distributions. So if those had been based on probability distributions, it would have been fairly straightforward to provide a quantitative estimate of the quality of the outputs. And those would have been captured in the confidence levels and confidence intervals. But because the selection of the parameter, in this case, SCE selected mitigation effectiveness, and in the risk results table, they were also not based on any type of probability distributions. It was not possible for SCE to enter quantitative estimates of the confidence intervals. So for future test drives, it would have been, it would be necessary, I think, for the commission to require the utility to select a collection of parameters and input parameters to test that will collectively utilize all the columns and all the fields in the test templates. Next slide, please. And I think the next, Vincent, we already discussed this at length. So the test drive largely focused on applying a perturbation of 1% plus or minus 1%, but I think as we discussed and is expressed by Dr. Mitchell, it probably would have been preferable to not only apply a small perturbation, but also at the extremes of the intervals, so that we can see how the numbers vary at the extremes. Next slide, please. SCE made 3 suggestions in the test drive. The one suggestion they made was to avoid confusion. We should clarify that year refers to the beginning of the year. SCE also suggested to add a column in the Excel spreadsheet to show the existing value of the parameter before sensitivity analysis is applied. SCE also suggested that we clarify that the sensitivity analysis assumes only the selected parameter in question is changed while holding other parameters constant. And I think that's the last slide. Any questions?
Do you have anything in the chat yet? If folks prefer, we could take a quick break and come back. Yeah, and folks can think through some questions, and then we'll come back. Well, we come back at 2:20 and have a slightly longer break, and then we can have a quick discussion, both about Steve's key observations and then also just the topic of the transparency in general. Sound good, everybody? Yeah. See you at 2:20. All right, I see Katie's back. Anyone from SC or PG&E back yet?
Yes, we're here.
Great, Steve. Yeah,
Uh,
Chris.
Thank you. Yeah, SCE's back.
I am back.
All right, you know, I'm going to try something. We've all been staring at my shared screen all day. Can we all see each other right now? It looks a little different for me, but what do you guys see?
Nothing's changed for me.
Is that right? All right, well, that didn't work at all. Well, I'm going to stop sharing. Thought it'd just be nice to change it up a little bit.
Oh, now I see a grid thing.
A
Grid.
grid of all of us.
Yeah.
Well, those of us who are sharing or who are turning our cameras on, feel free
Right.
to if you like. Just thought I'd try something a little different for the last part of the discussion, since we don't have any other slides to really go over yet. Yeah, I just see. I think there's still maybe some opportunity to reflect a little bit on what Steve just presented and have a couple more questions from everybody. And Katie, if you wanted to start us off, feel free.
Sure. I kind of saved my comments for the end. So this will be on Steve and also the utility proposals. And I just wanted to start by saying that I thought that the test drive was a really helpful tool for testing the proposal that was adopted by the commission and identifying any points of additional clarification needed and what we were going to get out of it. And so I wanted to start with that. But, you know, based on that, I think a couple of places where I came back and had sort of further thoughts and wanted to drive out additional, you know, potential changes to the template would be as far as the estimates go and giving the estimate quality. I find it I find it, and Chuck, who wasn't able to be here today, agreed. And I'll let Eric speak for himself that while it's an interesting, it's interesting and helpful maybe to put them into different categories to signal to the interveners how confident they were and the utilities are in different types of data sources, that it still is the case that just providing us the data sources from the get-go is perhaps preferable. And rather than needing to go through the multiple steps of like going back to a index or back to the work papers to see what the actual source was, it would be, you know, more helpful to just have that in the template. Next, I did want to highlight when it came to sensitivity, the PG&E presentation and slide on sensitivity with the chart and the slope using the 1090 numbers, or alternatively, it could be done with a you know, parameters of a distribution. I think I used those words correctly. I am a lawyer trying to talk statistics. Was more of what we had in mind when we discussed sensitivity from the outset. So appreciate the PG&E presentation there. A couple of other things that we would probably like to see more clearly called out in a template. And again, I know that some of the template discussion is perhaps for later in the proceeding, but just identifying it now. Discount rates used and whether for costs that are laid out for different mitigations, whether there's any uncertainty in those costs, or if that's sort of like, this is how much something will cost. Because if the utility is very wrong about a cost, that's going to have a big impact on the cost benefit ratio for that mitigation. So understanding how set in stone those are is helpful. Finally, I wanted to highlight that Turn has also engaged Eric Borden, who's with Synapse, as our consultant in this case, who is in addition to me and Chuck who you guys have been dealing with, Dr. Feinstein, through earlier phase of this case. And that's because Tern has been using Eric as our consultant in the ramps and in the GRCs. And so he really has the like boots on the ground experience with trying to take what the utilities have provided and come up with our alternatives. And so wanted to make sure that he was here to speak towards, throughout this proceeding, how our intervention in these cases can be made to be more productive and useful. So that's why I have him here, and I'm glad that he's able to provide his insights as well. So that's all I have to say for now.
Okay, great. Yeah, sure, Eric, go ahead.
Well, it's such a good segue that I think I have to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I think one thing to note on, kind of the boots on the ground perspective is very, very, very few parties are using the RSC information in the GRCs. I mean, it is relatively new, with PG&E being the first one a couple years ago, and then, well, no, not even. Whenever the GRC was filed, and then now Edison. So, I do want to go back to what I mentioned earlier, which is, and I think it does dovetail with, Tern's original motivations for proposing this transparency pilot or transparency part of SMAP, which is like, if you can replicate what the utility has done using their major assumptions, you can also change some of those assumptions. And I'll just say it is, at least as of now, since every utility does things very differently, actually, changing assumptions and having your own alternative proposal as an intervener, which is what, Tern and all the other stakeholders do from various perspectives, is really challenging. And so I think that part of the transparency pilot, or this part of SMAP, would be really useful to focus in on. How can we, when utility files a GRC, how can work papers be provided in a way that allows various stakeholders and interveners to understand what the utility has done and to vary assumptions based on whatever, their expertise or preferences tell them to do. And so, yeah, very few parties are doing that at this point. Tern is one of them, but one of very, very few. And so I hope to see that change over time, where it becomes, much easier for parties to engage with that information and to change it if they want to within the context of the GRC.
Okay. Thanks, Eric, for including that context. I know you had made that comment a little bit earlier today. Vincent had his hand up first, although I see Wendy just raised her hand. But I'll let Vincent go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, just wanted to cover a slightly different point. I think earlier Dr. Mitchell had mentioned, calculating both the sensitivity with the 1090 kind of approach, and then also the kind of plus minus approach. And I just want to push back a little. These calculations not simple to do. They're definitely time consuming. So I vote that we go with our preference to go with one methodology. That was my impression reading the position, that we kind of settled on the 1090. So I just want to appeal to that. I'll put that out there.
So sorry, Vincent, can you repeat your preference?
It's not a question. Yeah, it's more like a preference, I would say, for consideration here, which is basically, I think I heard earlier from Dr. Mitchell, we should calculate two sensitivities, the one using the 1090 and one using the plus minus, right? Because and his point was basically, the slope changes and the further out that if you have curvature in your curve, right? The slope changes the further out you go, you vary your assumption. So you would have different
average slopes depending on how big of a perturbation you use. And I totally get that, right? And totally get that. But I think the point is that for us to calculate either of these sensitivities, it's not trivial to do. We're working on it, so it's like for now, can we just kind of settle on one approach for now? And I thought that when I read the decision, originally we had proposed the plus minus approach. I read the decision and then it's kind of decided to go with the 1090 approach that Dr. Mitchell pushed, and we're okay with that. But I'd just like to keep it to just one sensitivity that we're calculating, not using two different methodologies.
Can I jump in there to?
Yeah.
My feeling of the using small perturbations is it's most applicable in the scientific field where the parameter you want to measure has a very high degree of precision. But in here, in RAM and GRC, the things that we're trying to measure have a great deal more uncertainty. So small perturbations really don't make a lot of sense.
And we're totally fine with that. So that's why I kind of suggest that we settle on one approach, the 1090. I think, Steve, it sounds like you're also kind of okay with that, kind of using the 1090 as well.
Yeah, I personally am, but I'm sure there are other there are parties who have a different opinion on this.
Okay. Oh yeah, sure. Dr. Mitchell, if you wanted to chime in.
Yeah, just to put this, if I remember Turn's position early on, I think it was Chuck's suggestion that, oh, well, you want to put in the entire distribution, just, represent the distribution and put that in. So ideally, that's what you do, but that's kind of hard. I think this is not as difficult a problem as is being framed, because if you're doing 1090, you're capturing 2 data points. If you're going to capture 2 data points, you can capture 4 data points. You do 1090, 51, and 53. Or 49 and 51. It's not really that much different to do it for 2 points as it is to do it for 4 points. And the 4 points would give you the variation around the mean, because if you have a continuous smooth distribution of your uncertainty, then you can really just pick either one and it's just fine. But it's when you have a weird distribution, you can have things, you may have a situation where your 10 and 90 are both at, give you lower risk values, but your mean sort of gives you a higher one. So it's sort of a convex curve, in which case, you wouldn't want to necessarily do exactly the 1090. I think both, basically knowing at the mean says, okay, if this changes, if we're off, how much is that going to make our estimate of risk or RSE move around? 1090 says, okay, well, when we're if we're way off, how sure are we? What's the worst this could be? What's the best this could be? And I think that's why I think all this isn't useful information, and it's just 4 data points versus 2 data points. Thanks.
Yeah, I kind of reflect based on work on this stuff, similar kind of modeling. I admit rather dated my knowledge of the modeling stuff. But I remember back in the old Monte Carlo days when we were doing Monte Carlo back in the time when I was doing it, it's quite hard to find the derivatives of Monte Carlo approach, right? You would have to basically simulate 10,000 trials at your value, tweak it a little bit, simulate another 10,000, tweak it a little bit, simulate another 10,000. So it's like, that's how it used to work back in the old days. I know there's a lot of these new techniques out there, but I'm just concerned that we're setting ourselves up for that kind of amount of work to do, right? So that's what, if you have a closed form solution, yeah, I can give you you can write down an equation for it. You don't need, any of the stuff. But I think if we move towards these kind of numerical things that PG&E is doing, that's where the challenges might come in. That's what I'm kind of concerned about.
Okay. And maybe further discussion of that could also happen in the comment and reply for this workshop, if that seems amenable, Dr. Mitchell. Yeah. Okay, great. Wendy, I'm sorry, you had to wait quite a bit. Thanks.
Yeah, actually was going back to something else that Eric was talking about having basically being able to replicate what the utility's done. I wondered, you talked about GRC work papers, and I'm wondering, do we want more work papers when they file the ramps, so that we could do that kind of analysis when the ramps come in, although it's much more compressed time frame. So I just want to throw that out there and see what Turn and others think.
I mean, we almost always, well, at least when I participated in the ramps, we would always get the work papers. I mean, so from Turn, well, it depends who Turn has. I used to be internal at Turn, as most of you know. It depends who they have on the ramp, but I do think it makes sense to see what do the work papers look like that the utilities are going to provide in the GRC, and how far does that get you as a stakeholder intervener once those proposals change? And the utilities proposal itself will change between the ramp and the GRC. So to me, it makes sense for that to be part of that, and that seems to be, the push for transparency here could lead into something like that.
You're saying to be able to make those kind of do the replications or alterations during the ramp stage, not just the GRC stage.
Yeah, I mean, and in particular, to know what the work papers will look like in the GRC, although sometimes they do look different, honestly, between the ramp and the GRC. And then to know if those work papers don't allow a stakeholder to, say, change major assumptions or, do its own proposal, to try to flag that at the ramp stage. But hopefully, I don't know, I hope at some point all that will be cleared up and the work papers will just be much more standardized and easier for various stakeholders to grapple with at the GRC stage, even if they weren't involved at all in ramp.
Okay. Is there any other questions on this specific topic, or does anyone have any additional questions that they'd like to ask on the transparency pilot? I was wondering if, since we do still have quite a bit of time left, if it's not worth going back to a few of those remaining questions that PG&E pointed out. They were questions that were in the shared planning questions that we provided. But I don't think Steve addressed them, and actually SCE did address planning question 2.4 a little bit. Does anyone have any additional thoughts that they'd like to provide on that particular topic? Regarding the difference between scenario and sensitivity analysis?
I just had a question. By scenario analysis, did you mean the 1090? Is that what you mean by scenario analysis? Or do you have a different definition?
And that's directed towards SCE, correct? Or Vincent?
PG&E.
Okay.
Towards PG&E?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not really sure because, like I was mentioning, we kind of refer to it as 1090 or the plus minus kind of thing, right? So I'm not really sure what scenario. I think it means 1090, but perhaps Steve, you could clear it up.
Yeah, Wendy, did you want to jump in or?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, I mean, I apologize, I missed part of the earlier workshop, but to me, I mean, isn't scenario analysis like you're running a different, possibly a different amount of mitigations or different, variation of mitigations, whereas the sensitivity analysis is you're changing assumptions into the calculations. That's the way I think of it, but Dr. Mitchell, I saw you shaking your head, yes, and wondered.
I understand that, and I think that actually in this particular instance, SCE has actually used something slightly different to describe the two topics. I was wondering if somebody from SCE could actually answer that real quick.
This is scary. If we go back to the SCE slide, we did define what we consider scenario versus what we consider sensitivity, right? In SCE's view, sensitivity is the plus or minus, and scenario is really the high and low case.
And Steve, if you could kind of jump in here, I believe part of this is also due to the type of risks and the mitigations that they've chosen for this particular analysis. Isn't that correct?
But the way I understand it is when SCE did the sensitivity analysis, they're using small perturbations, and it's limited to one variable. Whereas when they, just looking at the slide here, when they refer to scenario analysis, they change not just one variable, they change several variables at the same time. And those changes can be larger than small perturbations of 1%. So that's the way I understand it. Correct me if I'm wrong, Gary.
Is that right, Gary?
That's correct.
Yeah. Dr. Mitchell, does that help answer your question?
Yeah, that answers the question. I mean, it's a little bit, yeah, I can. So when you with the scenario, it's not just you're going 1090 with one of the variables. It would be that you take all the variables to 10 and all the variables to 90. I don't exactly understand. Or is it like one coherent scenario, like Wendy was saying, where here is, a certain set of different assumptions that's sort of on the low side. Here's a sort of different set of assumptions on the high side. Or is it just go 10, you just take all the variables and you go 10, 10, 10, 90, 90, 90.
Yeah, as illustrated here, I view it as a scenario run. A scenario run encompasses all the variables versus a sensitivity run, in my view, is just hold everything else, tweak one variable. That's how I view sensitivity versus scenario.
Yeah, because if you had all of your, if you had all your variables and they were all at 10 and you had a number of variables or parameters going in there, then every time you're taking another 10% of that, you're looking at just more of an extreme. So if you had 3 parameters all at the 10% level, that's 1 out of 1,000. So you're actually doing like a, 1/1000th and 1,000 because if your variables or parameters are uncorrelated. So I'm just, yeah. I'll need to look at that a little bit more.
Okay. Let me jump us to the next question that PG&E left for us, which is that if an IOU sample risk does not assume a probability distribution, which SCEs did not, what analytical method approach should be used to assess the impact of uncertainty on key parameters used in the risk modeling process? And I believe, and Steve can correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the reasons we're asking this is because, you know, as Steve pointed out, we were hoping that the entire template would be filled out. But in most cases, that's going to require a probability distribution for.
So to add more clarity to that, what I meant to say was not all parameters. So if you pick a parameter, it may not necessarily have enough quantitative background for it to make use of all those columns and all those fields. It may make use of some of the columns. You may be able to describe the uncertainty of that parameter qualitatively. On the other hand, if you pick another parameter, you may be able to describe it using probability distributions, in which case you would be able to fill out those columns that describe numerically what the uncertainties are. So it is not necessarily true. It is not necessary that you have to pick a parameter that uses that utilizes all the fields, all the columns.
Right.
But collectively, for the test drive purposes, you should pick a suite, a collection of parameters that allow you to make use of all those columns, collectively speaking.
Does that follow for everybody? Vincent, Gary, do you guys have any feedback on that?
I don't really. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I guess then just the last planning question, and I think Dr. Mitchell actually kind of asked this in a way, was are there other kinds of analysis that you are considering that's not currently supported by the transparency proposal? And I think that was kind of asked to Gary. But since, yeah, does anybody have any thoughts about that going forward? Okay.
Well, I'll just say that one thing I liked in Vincent's proposal was that you use the sort of the extrema to get the slope and tell you where your big uncertainties are. And I think maybe having you know, what you can use this for, if you wanted to, is to have just identify sort of a uncertainty remediation plan. Where are the things that have the most effect, that you're the most uncertain about, and then how do you improve that to get better values? I think that might be a useful sort of summary that can come out of one of these transparency analyses that provides future guidance for, you know, how to improve things in the future.
Yeah, that was our thoughts exactly, right? You know, we would come up with, you know, we would know which things to focus on, come up with remediation plans for them. Yeah, so that was our kind of motivation.
Thanks.
I did, going back to 2.5.
Sure.
I did have a quick question for Vincent. I mean, how are you coming up with the probability distributions of uncertainty? So you just, I guess, question I have in my mind is, are those necessarily the same as the probability distribution of whatever that variable is? If that makes sense.
So I think right now that's why Dr. Mitchell covered it a little bit and gave some perspective. Like, let's say, I think what we're referring to here is, like, let's say we're using a normal distribution. Normal distribution has a mean, has a standard deviation. I think we're saying that, you know, we are not even certain about what the mean is.
right? So that's the thing that we're trying to figure out here. We're not even certain what the mean, so we're not even sure what the mean is. You know, if you think about it, I think that the Bayesian guys like to think about, oh, these parameters, the mean, the standard deviation, they have their own distribution around this stuff. So, but we're not there yet. We haven't gone to that extreme. But I think what we're trying to do to get ourselves there was like, okay, you know, what can we say? What can we ask our SMEs? We can ask our SMEs to estimate where the 10th percentile for this mean parameter looks like, what the 90th percentile for this mean parameter looks like, and then we can use that in the sensitivity calculation. So it's not necessarily that. So we haven't got to the stage where we can put a standard deviation around the mean itself. So you know, the Bayesian guys, that it's really nice that they can do that, but we're not there yet.
So you're saying you don't know what the distribution looks like. So you're just guessing at not guessing, but you're having some kind of educated guess at the 10th percentile and the 90th, and then running it that way.
And that was the original motivation why we went with the plus minus, right? Because we kind of felt like, you know, our SMEs would be kind of uncomfortable with, you know, putting out what the 10 percentile is and the 90th percentile is, because it's like they're not even sure what the mean is, right? The mean of the mean is, right? So it's like, but you know, like 1090, so be it. I mean, that's what we ended up with. You know, I think we'll live with that, and yes, that's where we are.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I think the way to frame this with SMEs, and probably the way you're framing it, is not so much, you know, give us the probability distribution, but you know, you're giving us a mean based on your best estimate. What are you 90% sure it's greater than, and what are you 90% sure it's less than? And that then frames your limits on it. You know, I think where, you know, some few of these parameters, I think, probably do have actual data underlying them, and you can pull it out and plot it. But I mean, based on data request responses and looking at, you know, just the lack of actual data for a lot of these things, you know, I think there's, you know, I get lots of data request responses saying our SME estimate is X, and so, you know, I think that's okay. I think we just have to understand we're not knowing that very well could be helped by actually collecting some data and improving the estimate. So I think that sort of the ask here is to the utilities, don't pressure the SMEs to, you know, give you definitive numbers when the number isn't definitive. You know, if they don't know that well, that should be in the transparency table, and that's what I think that helps everybody with.
Yeah, I just would follow on to what Joe said with sometimes the most valuable thing is understanding what you don't know and where you can do more testing and data collection. And so to that end, I agree with what Joe just put out.
Okay. All right, I think that probably covers 2.5 and 2.4, and we just kind of wrapped up 2.8. Are there any other general questions that are still outstanding for the transparency pilot? Okay.
Hey, Eddie.
Yes, Hawkinson.
If I may jump in, just tag on as a general comments or thoughts based on others as well. Like Eric mentioned, or Wendy mentioned, even Dr. Michel mentioned, that when we go through the ramp analysis, the work paper we were talking about earlier, is the information is there, but those numbers are very solid, right? There is no way sometimes we can trace it, or how the calculation was done, what's the methodology or the equation look like. to draw that final conclusion. And if the utilities can provide clear transparency and also the actual data, how they draw from point A to point B, that would be really helpful for ramp analysis. And then following through the GRC, if I know GRC is different, I think Eric mentioned, but even though that is different, we need to know what are the difference they made on GRC. That way, whenever we talked about it, we can understand better. So I think that's one point. We need to make sure the informations are connected, that rather than we do a lot of data request, which is overwhelming sometimes, that can be minimized and we can still have the consistency throughout the process.
Okay, thanks, Pankaj.
I think that's very well said, and I can imagine some kind of future state where, we kind of identify for, say, each major program, say 5, 10 variables and assumptions that really affect the cost benefit analysis, where like even someone who's not that good at Excel could go in and change those and say, here's how it changes the cost benefit ratio. I mean, I think that's kind of a future state, but I could imagine that something like that at some point would be possible. And the hope is that that will help more parties get engaged with this information, which I think there's a lot out there in underlying utility GRCs, but it's difficult to get at this point.
Absolutely.
Great. There's no additional thoughts or questions. I might close this out a little bit early. We're still about 30 minutes ahead of schedule. Feel free to interrupt me if you have any last thoughts. Yeah, this is just to give everybody some idea about what the next steps are going to be, which is that there's a recording for this this workshop, and it's going to be shared within 3 to 4 days on the CPUC's YouTube channel, and I can share that with everyone on the service list along with when it comes out, and then we're going to have, for this particular workshop, this will be slightly different than the rest of the workshops, but there's going to be a summary that's going to be filed by PG&E and SCE. They have already an idea of how they're going to structure that summary, although Ken, just a quick note to forward on that structure to me as well. And so that'll go out on July 21st, and SPD will file basically a version of the post-test year proposal that has already been shared with parties. We may make some slight additions, and that will be filed on July 21st. It'll come with a ruling. We're going to work with the ALJ to basically set up, for the most part, like I mentioned earlier, we're going to be using the planning questions to guide your comment and replies, or at least your opening comments. So that'll be filed with the July 21st post-test year proposal. Then opening comments will come on August 10th, and reply comments will come on August 17th. Yeah, just before I go on, is there any additional questions? Yeah, I see Chris. Go ahead.
Thank you. I was just wondering if for the summary, if we could have a little bit more time so that to the degree we're taking party input or review, we would have a bit of time instead of just, kind of going on a super urgent basis, try and get this done in about a week's time. And we feel that we can do that summary and it doesn't affect parties' ability to write their opening comments as they see fit. since it's just a summary of what occurred rather than an advocacy piece. So would it be possible for SCE and PG&E to have a little bit more time for that, including so that if we're wanting to go over some aspect of it with another party, we give them adequate time for their own review and feedback?
Well, I think the goal is actually to have the summary be filed, and along with opening comments, I think other parties can make suggestions about how the summary should have been adjusted. That was my understanding. But Ken, did you have something else?
Yeah, I wanted to agree with Chris to the extent that you want us to circulate the workshop summary similar to how we did it in phase 2, meaning we developed a summary, we circulated to parties asking them to redline factual changes. So there was more time built in for that process. But if what you're saying is we're generating, a summary and providing it to you, and then corrections can come through the comment process, I would leave that up to you. But I do agree with Chris. If we do need to circulate for redline, we probably would need a little bit more time.
Yeah, I think the problem would be if we wanted to, if we required more time, you guys would have to file a motion most likely in order to ask for additional time. I can touch base with the ALJ. I don't think the ALJ is actually online at the moment. But I can touch base with her and try to figure out what's the best approach. But in my mind, and then other parties can chime in here, I would think that it's definitely possible for the red lines to come in with the opening comments. And then if necessary, then we can probably submit, or you guys can probably refile the summary that includes those red lines. Does that sound like one approach?
It's certainly, yeah, it's a workable approach. Just concerned about that July 21 to the extent, we need to circulate. But if it's just simply us providing a factual recap of this similar to phase 2, I think we could work with that date. It is tight.
The only reason that we're asking for a summary to be filed for that particular topic is because there's no staff proposal, there's no party proposal that's planned to be filed with that. So it's just a matter of building up the record, and so that there's a record to use for developing a PD. That's the main goal. And of course, we have the recording here as well, but having your guys' summary would also be helpful.
Yeah. So, I would just say, dependent on the rules you're kind of giving us is whether or not that date's workable.
Yeah, I would say that I would aim for the July 21st date, and we'll try to do the red lines along with opening comments on August 10th. And I will touch base with the ALJ to find out if there's a different way that we should approach this. But for right now, let's just aim for that. Hi, Vincent. I see you in the corner.
Thanks.
Okay. Sound good?
Yeah. Thanks, Eddie. I was listening to an attorney in the room, Peter O'Borg, and he was talking about the difference between a filing and potentially just a submission. But maybe that's something we could just work through on the side as we develop a path forward.
Okay. Sounds good.
Thank you.
Yep. Right. Are there any additional questions? The next workshop is going to be held on July 26th, and it's going to be on the topic of tail risk. And Dr. Mitchell has been working diligently on creating a white paper on that topic, and I've been able to read through it slightly in between to our breaks today, which is nice, and I'll send him some comments later this afternoon. And so we should have that proposal shared out by tomorrow. Yeah, so we're forward to that. I don't know if Jake, are you still on the line?
I'm here, yes.
I don't know if you wanted to share any additional thoughts from the commissioner's office.
Nothing for me, just really appreciate everyone's engagement on this topic today.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to end on kind of a personal note then. This is my 365th day with the commission, exactly. And I just wanted to say that it's been a pleasure. You know, just want to thank, there's a lot of people behind the scenes who work on this. Alicia Russell, for instance, was very instrumental in making sure that we get all our invites and that you know, we get connected to IT. And I want to thank our two folks from IT, Marcos and George, for their help today as well. I'm going to thank my colleagues, Hafizer and Steve, for their presentations, and Fred for his support, as always. And of course, PG&E and SE for giving us their thoughts today. And everybody for attending today. It's much appreciated. And yeah, I'm very excited actually for the coming months. We have a lot more topics to go over and a lot more discussions. And yeah, we're happy to get your guys' input and your feedback. So please continue to keep this spirit when you're coming into your opening comments and reply comments. Have additional discussions to have, I'm sure.
Thank you, Eddie. We appreciate your presence here and leading these discussions as well as the rest of the PUC staff. Thank you very much.
Oh, one last person I forgot to thank. He'll have to see it on YouTube, but is Arnold Sun, who has left us at RASA, but he was my partner in arms in trying to put together this schedule. And I appreciate that everyone is trying their best to kind of meet the schedule. It's been complicated, but yeah, I'll thank Arnold again, and then thank everybody for their diligent efforts to meet all the different deadlines that we have going out over the next couple of months.
Eddie, on behalf of SCE, the SCE team, thank you to you and the staff and the whole team for all of the efforts here. We do appreciate it.
Awesome. All right.
Thank you, Eddie.
Yeah. If anybody has any questions, please don't hesitate to drop me an email or yeah, I'll be around. So yeah, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Oh yeah, I gotta save the